To this February 27th meeting, will everyone please stand for the pledge? Translation.
Rodriguez.
Sí, buenas tardes y bienvenidos de parte de la Junta Directiva del Distrito Escolar de Santa Bárbara. Si hay alguien que necesite la ayuda de un intérprete, por favor levante la mano para darle un audífono. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. And we have headsets for the hearing impaired as indicated at the bottom of that slide. We have nothing to announce from closed session. Acceptance of donations.
Move to approve with gratitude.
Moved by Ms. Parker, seconded by Ms. Malakoff. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Donations accepted with gratitude. Introductions, proclamations, presentations, or recognitions.
Well, I'm pleased to introduce John Becchio and members of his staff who are here with us tonight about Santa Barbara Junior High School's Looking Good Santa Barbara Award. Mr. Becchio, would you please come to the podium?
Well, good evening, board members. I'm excited. I'm excited about Santa Barbara Junior High. If you'll allow me, since I have your attention, to just tell you a couple things I'm excited about that aren't necessarily related to recycling, but I do have a math teacher here tonight that was instrumental in the recycling program. And I wanted to brag a little bit about math and English because we have really engaged this year in aligning curriculum, as I've spoke to you at the site plan presentations, but aligning curriculum, grading practices, designing some assessments. And they have really led the charge and started using Edusoft and doing an item analysis. And we're really going to be leading the way in terms of common assessments and analyzing data through Edusoft and then driving instruction based on that data. So I'm excited about that because we are using the Edusoft currently. And so the other thing is I want to give you a heads up on as a summer, we're calling it our College Bound Leadership Academy. And we're going to have about 130 incoming seventh graders at our school this summer for a type of orientation, but we're going to be talking to them about college and about what it takes, what type of leadership skills it takes to get to college, to get through high school, on to college. And then we're going to be hitting them with some math and English standards that will fill the gaps so that when they arrive to us in seventh grade, they're ready for grade level instruction and possibly beyond that. So those two things I'm really excited about. While I had your attention, I wanted to tell you about those things. But I want to introduce who's here tonight because they really played key role in our recycling program and the award that we are receiving this week. And Brianna Lax is our math teacher at our school, and she started several years ago just laying the groundwork for our recycling program, which really is a lot of work. It's coordinating the delivery of containers and the right type of containers, then trying to put together a system for the recycling to get from the classrooms out to the dumpster, and then the pickups, and are the pickup days enough, et cetera. So, and then there's a whole education component to it that she worked with Celeste Carlisle at the city with. And so the groundwork was really laid this year. And then this summer, interesting, one of the first things I did as the new principal was I visited a classroom that was being used by the YEA program at our school, and they asked me to, it was really a setup actually, Brianna asked me to come in and talk to the kids about recycling at our school. So I went in there and they had some questions they asked me. One of them was, how's your school doing recycling? And of course I said, well, we're doing a great job with recycling, and they all laughed when I answered them. And I kind of didn't get it at first, and then they had told me that they had done a trash analysis just prior to meeting with me, so they knew how we were doing in terms of recycling, and it actually wasn't that great. We had some room for improvement. They saw a lot of things that should be recycled that weren't. So I was humbled or embarrassed a little bit, and I decided, well, if I'm going to be out there saying that it's a good program, then let's make it a good program. So Then enters the our city partners, and here tonight is Eric Lohela, who's been working with us on some future planning and things we're going to be doing in the future with respect to recycling. And anyways, at that time, Edward France was in charge of the recycling program, and he actually educated us on how to improve our program. And in stepped Robert Aguilar, who's our head custodian, and he decided that he'd take it upon himself to make that part of his daily runs. So he does a recycling run with a student who wasn't able to be here tonight, but he was going to show up anyways. They do a run every day to the recycling bin. So the goal was to reduce a trash pickup day, which is pretty significant savings to the district. And in November, we were able to reduce that 1 day of trash pickup. I forget the numbers. It's $100. Is it $100 a pickup or something like that? So that's pretty significant. Eric and I met the other day, and we're talking about some things that will be allowing us to reduce another day of trash pickup, hopefully in the next year sometime. So let's see. What did I forget anything? What's that?
I believe you
Oh,
have Eric.
the award is completely a recyclable material, made of recyclable material. Sure, we can't forget the award, and it was brought here tonight. So,
I believe you have Eric Aguilar with you as well.
Robert.
Robert
Yeah,
Aguilar.
Robert
Sorry.
Robert again, like I mentioned, is our head custodian who's really done the work to get that out. And I have to tell you that the folks from the city, I realized they are absolute experts, and they have the solution. I mean, the solution is there. And what I'm realizing with my meetings is that there's so many solutions. We just need to put them in place, and that takes a little bit of work and some education, et cetera. So we're going to continue working with the city and the schools. I know sitting on that committee, I know all the schools are working, but we're going to lead the charge and be a sample for the rest of us. So,
Ms. Lax, Mr. Aguilar, if you want to step on this side of the podium, then you'll get caught on our.
I told Robert he
purposes
could
of our
make a
broadcast.
15-minute speech if he wanted.
There
so.
you go. I bet he really doesn't want to.
Anyway, so I'm very proud of it.
I think Santa Barbara Junior High should be very proud of setting the mark academically as well as from a recycling standpoint. I appreciate the update. But I think what's most critical is seeing a partner from the city, seeing a teacher who's willing to take ownership of the project, and having our custodian here at Santa Barbara Junior High also willing to take ownership for the project, because I think that's what it takes to make a successful program. One person can't do it by themselves, and people all across the system need to be partnering up. So I salute all of you for that. I think it's fantastic. And I think that you are the model for the rest of our schools. Maybe they're doing it, but we haven't heard yet, and nobody's gotten a Blue Glass Recycled Award that I know about yet. So thank you. I think that's fantastic.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That is a great team effort. And that's it tonight for our introductions, proclamations, recognitions, and presentations.
Excellent. Thank you. Do we have a student report tonight?
Well, we do. Shall I give the superintendent's report first?
I'm sorry. I apologize. I'm jumping ahead. That was it for introductions, proclamations, et cetera.
But you're up next. Well, I'm pleased to report on our categorical program monitoring review. A California Department of Education review team visited the district on February 14 and 15 to follow up on our English learner programs that were reviewed for No Child Left Behind and state compliance in 2005-06. The review team evaluated English learner programs at McKinley Elementary and LaCumbre Junior High, already focused on improving the delivery of their English learner programs. The staff and administration of both schools, McKinley and LaCumbre Junior High, had been working diligently on strategies for English learner success. The CPM team recognized that. They determined that both schools, and therefore the districts, were in compliance on our English learner programs, and our congratulations goes to the teachers and staff at McKinley and LaCumbre. The principals of those schools, Juanita Carney and Joanne Keynes, are to be commended for their leadership. The staff worked hard on this. It was a collaborative effort. I was meeting with the Lacumber staff today, and they described how it was such a joint effort and how they appreciated the efforts of Cynthia White, who worked very closely with that staff in developing their strategies for improvement, and the CELUS, the Center for Educational Leadership program, for working with McKinley. Michael Gonzalez, Jan Zettel, and Robin Sawaski also had important roles in the administrative team. The board brief. Generally, on the second and fourth Friday of each month, my office issues a report to the board called the board brief. This is a collection of reports and articles on school and district matters. A copy is on display in the reception area and can be provided through the superintendent's office. In the February 15 board brief, the board saw a table on Peabody Charter School transfers in 2006-07. I bring that up because we'll have a presentation from Peabody tonight on charter revisions and MOU revisions. There were 104 students attending Peabody from other school districts, plus 119 from other schools in our district. So that's 104 from outside of our district, 119 from other schools inside our district. I recently received a memo showing EduSoft data on teacher and administrator ratios, and we've applied that to our district. Our teacher ratios are above the state average. The state average is 52 teachers per 1,000 students. We have 56 teachers per 1,000 students. That's some difference, but the largest difference was in administrative ratios. Our administrative ratios are below the state average, particularly for district managers. We have only 2.2 district office administrators per 1,000 students, compared to a state average of 5.1 district office administrators and coordinators. The number of the district office administrators is just 43% of the state average. So that's why you're working Saturdays and Sundays. So we have far fewer district administrators as compared to state averages, and you can expect that in the next board brief. The EduSoft data is a perfect segue into the next topic. Next week is the Week of the School Administrator. In recognition of the importance of educational leadership, the state of California has declared March 5th through 9th, 2007 as the Week of School Administrators. Our district's very lean management team does an exceptional job each day in focusing on excellence for all. A message will be going out to the school administrators thanking them for their hard work. I also want to report on our Measure V construction tours. In February, a small group of community leaders in Goleta were invited to a behind-the-scenes tour of Dos Pueblos High School, focusing on the new auditorium, new classrooms, the pool, and other upgrades on the campus. It was very well received. We plan to do the same thing at San Marcos and Santa Barbara High School in March, inviting government and community leaders to Santa Barbara. And once again, our thanks to the citizens of this community for providing bond money to upgrade our schools. In a follow-up on district history, a big thanks goes to Carrie Martin in the superintendent's office for her work in preparing a document about the district's history for inclusion on our district website. The document, you may recall, is Robert Christensen's 1963 USC master's thesis, which was on the history of our school district. Well, Carrie has gone through that document, prepared it so that it can be put on our website, and that document was an important part of our 140th year anniversary celebration this last June. And board members will recall the fun and amazing facts that I read off regularly about the district. Upcoming events. Well, this is going to sound busy. Looking ahead, here are some of the events we look forward to in our next 3 weeks. Special events will take place tomorrow. Santa Barbara Junior High School will hold their band concert. Dos Pueblos High School's Career Day will take place. Santa Barbara County's Spelling Bee will take place tomorrow in the county auditorium. March 2nd, that's Friday, is Dr. Seuss's birthday, so schools across the districts are participating in Reading Across America. Community members are sharing in the fun by reading to children and a little trivia. It is also the 50th anniversary of the publishing of The Cat in the Hat. So I'll have my red and white striped hat on. I hope you will too. An exhibition of works on paper or canvas by students throughout the secondary district will be on display at the Faulkner Gallery in the Downtown Public Library beginning March 2nd. There will be an opening reception. The art will be on display through March 30. The mock trial semifinal and final rounds will take place on March 3rd. The district's honor band concert is coming up on March 7th in the La Cumbre Junior High Auditorium. San Marcos High School's air bands will be performing on March 8. La Colina Junior High will perform Once Upon a Mattress on March 8, 9, and 10. Goleta Valley Junior High's performance of Fiddler on the Roof will be March 9, 10, 11, and 12. La Colina's Science Fair will begin on March 14. Santa Barbara Junior High's spring play Aladdin will be performed on March 16 and 17. This information is posted on the district's website. So if you missed it, please go to our website. And we do have a student report tonight. I believe this is Kelsey Farish, right? Kelsey Farish is from Santa Barbara High School. She was unable to be with us at the last meeting, so she came tonight. Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you. I apologize for not being able to speak at the last meeting. I had caught that cold that's been going around. But anyways, okay, so update. A few weekends ago, our school had our King of Hearts dance. We held the dance in our gym, and over 400 students attended, and everyone had a fantastic time. Also, a few weeks ago was Diversity Awareness Week, and we had a bunch of well-received assemblies with speakers including Jesse Billhauer, who spoke about overcoming adversity. And thanks to the ADL, we were able to have a speaker who is in the Witness Protection Program and who talked about the negative effects of racism based on his own personal experiences. So that was really cool. And I've just been informed that our school has also been the first school to be invited to participate in a UCSB Arabic program, which is offering 6 students the opportunity to travel to Jordan this summer. So that's really exciting. And we are currently in the process of raising money for Pennies for Patients. And it's our second year working with the Leukemia Lymphoma Society. And with a new method for collecting the money, we're hoping to get more students involved and raise more money than we have ever before. And ASB elections are also approaching for the next year's class, 2007-2008. This will be the second year we are using the electronic voting system on computers, which helps ensure that as many students as possible can vote and the votes are calculated accurately. In an effort to support the teachers and reduce class interruptions, we are also moving our our monthly legislative meetings to lunchtime, encouraging students to participate by offering lunch instead of taking time out of class. And we are currently beginning to plan our end of the year senior activities and look forward to the months to come. So thank you very much. Any questions? No? Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Kelsey. We appreciate it. And feel free to leave at this point. Do not feel obliged to stay. I'm sure you have work to do. We are on to public comments, and I think we have 2.
We have 2, Tiara Dotson and Laura Baker.
Good evening. My name is Tiara Dotson, and I'm here on behalf of La Cumbre. We wanted to thank Dr. Sarvis for coming to our school today and answering many of our questions. One of the questions that did come up that is of concern to us is the budget for the Community Academy, which is proposed to perhaps move over for next year. We're concerned about the fact that right now the Academy is paying rent into the elementary budget, But if they move on to a secondary campus, that rent will be transferred to the secondary district. Right now, the secondary district is the one that has money. The elementary district is the one that does not. So we had proposed perhaps finding an elementary site so that that money that the academy is currently paying into the elementary budget would not be taken from the elementary budget and would be applied back to the secondary budget. The other concern that we have is the talk of busing. We're concerned that busing coming out of the general fund will be a detriment to our secondary budget and also to the rest of the schools. And as we're talking about labor negotiations, I think that perhaps we do really need to focus in on what money is coming out of the general funds. We're concerned that as this deadline is approaching for this big decision, that we're worried that you don't have enough information in front of you. Perhaps having a 5-year plan. We were talking about how in time we will become a basic aid district, then maybe if we could just hold off with our status quo long enough to really get all the information needed to make a good and sound decision, it might be the best for everyone involved, elementary and secondary. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura Baker.
Thank you. Good evening. The more I think about all the issues that we've heard about in the last few meetings, particularly at our workshop on the 6th of February, the more I really think that you need to not make a decision to move or not move the academy one way or the other at our next meeting. I know this is coming before you in the next couple weeks. I just think there are way too many detail issues that have not been settled yet, and I think the dust needs to settle before you can actually make a decision that is in the best interest of everyone concerned. So as much as I know the academy wants to be together, and we want them to be together in one site, I don't think now is the time to do it. And I apologize to the academy parents for that. I don't envy their position. I know that it's been frustrating. It's been frustrating for us to hear about this possible proposal, obviously. But I do think that with the budget issues, the school closure issues, the basic aid issues, the possibility of the busing issues, the possibility of traffic study issues, and all of those things surrounding, well, all the things you have to think about in the next few weeks, in the next few months. I don't think this is the time to make this decision. So one of the interim options that Pat Saley had presented to you on February 6th in the last update for the facilities plan was a status quo. And I really think that that is the smartest, most appropriate way to go at this time. And as frustrating as that is for some parties involved, I do think that's the best thing to do. Again, I'll say it, the academy is doing well. Their scores are good. I know it's not the best situation to be in, to have your school in two separate places, but they are to be commended for how well they have done. And I think that one more year is not going to make or break their viability as a school. So I want you to consider that before you make your decisions. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Baker. And I think it would not be out of line to point out that Ms. Baker had a big role in the successful CPM visit to La Cumbre, yeah. We are on to our consent agenda.
I would like to pull item D13.
D7 and D10?
7, 10, and 13.
And I have a correction on D1.
Okay,
That correction is on the minutes for December 8.
okay.
The minutes assume that all the board members were in attendance throughout the meeting. That was our tour of facilities at Santa Barbara High, San Marcos High, Dos Pueblos. Dr. Noel was not with us at Dos Pueblos. Therefore, our statement that reads, the full board having returned from the 3 high school sites and site inspections reconvened and adjourned to closed session. We should read just the 4 board members.
Okay, so does somebody want to move to approve the remaining items and also that correction to the December 8th minutes?
I'll move to approve the remaining items plus that correction.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. I think that was unanimous.
I'm still back there trying to remember whether I came back to the closed session. I think I did, didn't
I don't,
I? Records that?
No.
I didn't go to DP,
no.
but I'm pretty
That-
sure I came back to the closed session.
For that closed session?
But
Well, let's,
and I'd hate to have the record misrepresent.
Yeah, we
I
have to
know, I
go back
agree.
to the tape. Okay,
I'll tell you
We'll
what,
do that.
we will go back to the tape.
Okay.
That'll tell us.
indeed it will.
Look at the tapes.
Okay, so we will get back to,
So I recorded a no vote on that.
okay,
Can we go back and
hang on one second. Who made the motion on that? Thank you, Ms. Malakoff. Who seconded? Thank you. Okay, so you got that, and it's a
Got it.
4-0-1 vote.
4-1.
Okay. And then items D7, 10, and 13 were pulled. Now, I am concerned that with regard to item D13, usually when we pull items, we hold them until the end of the meeting. But I want to make sure we don't have any community members who came to hear item D13.
I know that two people thought it was going to be later in the evening, so they were going to come a little bit later.
Perfect. I just
Good.
wanted to make sure that someone didn't come at 7:15 thinking that we would get to it right off the bat. Thank you, Ms. Baker. Okay, so we are on to our action agenda. We'll return to those items later in the evening. So item E1, second reading and adoption of modifications to Administrative Regulation 5144.1, suspension and expulsion due process.
We've been discussing these procedures, over a series of meetings over the past year. Mr. Gonzalez brought draft language to you at our last meeting. Mr. Gonzalez will make tonight's presentation, and this is on for action tonight.
Thank you very much. The changes that were previously discussed by the board have been incorporated in this document. We also made contact with representatives from the Santa Barbara Teen Legal Clinic and advised them that they would be presented, the modifications to the administrative regulations would be presented this evening for a second reading and possible adoption. I want to share with you that since we published the memo and the regulations, it has come to our attention that there is one item that can be deleted from our proposed regulations. I don't find it right now, and I'll find it in a few minutes, but it has to do with the Education Code specifies that expulsion records are disclosable records. There's been a court case that challenged that ruling. The challenge was based on the fact that FERPA does not permit the disclosure of student records. And in this case, federal law supersedes state law. And so that particular sentence will be stricken from our ARs. Expulsion records are not disclosable documents. Other than that, these administrative regulations incorporate all of the changes and recommendations made by the board in the previous 9 sessions that we've had. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Quickly, before we hear any board discussion, on page 16 of 18, there are a couple of typos, and I just ripped out the sheet and I'll hand it to you. They're not anything critical.
If I can also share with you, at the last board meeting, there was discussion about typos, and I want to take ownership for these ARs, but I also want you to know that all of this is pretty much verbatim from the Education Code that sometimes is very difficult, uses very difficult English and things that don't strike us as grammatically correct. Okay, but thank you for those corrections.
This didn't fall under any of those categories.
Thank you.
Board comments. I mean, we've had this in front of us numerous times over a very long period of time. And I would be pleased to hear a motion on a vote if
Well, I'm not making a motion yet.
Okay, okay.
But I did want to acknowledge the revision on page 14 of 18, that the final paragraph under F that we had discussed at the last meeting. I felt that the revision made it much clearer and was in keeping with what we discussed. I also wanted to just ask a quick question, and that was when we contacted members of Teen Court, et cetera, regarding the fact that this was going to be on the agenda, did we have any response from them?
We've actually contacted Teen Court, or
Teen
the Santa
Legal
Barbara
Service.
Teen
I'm
Legal
thinking Teen
Clinic
Legal Service,
twice. The first time, it was a very late notice, and as you recall, they requested that we delay making a decision. We have received no correspondence from them regarding tonight's presentation. I also may share with you that I'm not at liberty to speak on behalf of the Teen Legal Clinic, but I believe that the objections or the points that they stressed to the board have been incorporated in our proposed ARs. Specifically, they requested that parents continue to have the right to hold a hearing, and as you know, that right has been embedded in these administrative regulations. I also want to point out on page 15 of 18, the third paragraph, the last sentence in that paragraph is what I was referring to. The language says expulsion records shall be non-privileged, disclosable public records. I ask that you strike that, and based on the FERPA ruling. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Any other questions, concerns? Motion?
I move to approve with the one revision to page 15 of 18 that's been discussed.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of approving the second reading and adoption, actually the adoption of modifications to the administrative regulations 5144, suspension and expulsion / due process, signify by saying aye. Aye. It passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you for all of your hard work, Mr. Gonzalez. Item E2, review of Cesar Chavez Charter and approval of Memorandum of Understanding revisions.
Well, in recognition of Mr. Gonzalez's hard work, we're going to ask him to come back to the podium. We had brought revisions in the MOU forward from Cesar Chavez earlier. We had discussed the possibility of changes. We've since adopted board policy language on charter schools. And Mr. Gonzalez, I'll let you do the presentation.
Thank you. You may recall that on November 28th, the board did approve the 4 appendices related to the Cesar Chavez MOU. At that time, it was felt that, or the direction from the board was to approach the governance council, the principal and the governance council, to find out if they were amicable to making a change in their MOU. We explored that possible change, and the change had to do with changing the criteria for wording that would change the criteria that the board could use to judge if the school was indeed meeting the current education code requirements for renewal. We checked with a number of different sources and were advised that the MOU is not an appropriate place to make those kinds of changes, that if the board felt it was appropriate to add language that deviates from education code, that the charter document itself is that appropriate mechanism. We have attached a copy of that charter document, and with your permission, I'm going to, is that set up? Yeah, it is. With your permission, I'm going to very briefly share with you the provisions of the charter and then point out a couple of things that, please.
And as you're preparing that, let me say we're also fortunate to have with us Paul Minnie, who's our charter attorney. tonight, and I would like him to come forward in a moment and address that very issue as to whether we can move the bar up, set a more rigorous standard than ENCODE.
Thank you. There are 14 provisions, or actually, excuse me, 16 provisions to a charter. They range from educational program descriptions to school closure procedures. Provision 14 specifically outlines a procedure to resolve disputes, and it's our recommendation that should the board want to modify the language of the charter in terms of renewal, that we are obligated to follow the procedures that we've agreed in provision 14. And I've underlined the relevant portions of provision 14 that do permit the district to sit down with the governing council and begin negotiations to modify the charter. I share with you in the first paragraph, the very first step is to conduct an informal conference where both sides, or the district in this case, would state what it is that we would like to happen. And it specifically calls for the superintendent and the principal to meet. If you go to the second paragraph, if that meeting did not result in an agreement, the provision 14 of the charter that we've approved requires that the board, our board, as well as the governing board, select members who would identify a third-party arbitrator. And we would then go to that arbitration process to see if we could incorporate that language. I want to note to you, I want to point out to you folks that in the second paragraph it says, the last sentence of the second paragraph, findings or recommendations of the arbitrator shall be non-binding unless the governing boards of the school and the grantor jointly agree to bind themselves. All right? And then the language goes on to state that, of course, we do have a right to enter into these negotiations. All right? And I think I'll stop there and defer to Mr. Minnie any additional comments we might have.
That sounds good. Paul Minnie is from Spector, Middleton, Young, and Minnie, LLP, and he's our go-to guy on charter policy.
Thanks. Well, good to see the Santa Barbara City Board again. Long time no see. I see some fresh faces on the board. Maybe you don't recognize me as well, but like Dr. Sarvis said, I'm one of the principals of a firm in Sacramento, and we just focus on charter school law pretty much up and down the state of California. We do everything charter for both school districts and charter schools up and down the state. I'm not familiar with all of the facts, I think, of this specific issue, although this is, I think, the issue you emailed me about that we communicated on. And it, from what I understand, is there might be a dialogue going on right now as it relates to charter school renewal about whether or not the individual charter school is meeting the standards of renewal and whether the district can set higher standards for renewal. And this is I was telling Dr. Sarvis, this is a debate that's going on right now actually in LA Unified School District, because the law was changed about 2 or 3 years ago, AB 1137, to put in place a provisional law that says a charter must meet a certain level of academic performance or it cannot be renewed. And there's been some dialogue about whether or not that's a floor, a cap, or just a standard for renewal. Before AB 1137 was passed, the charter itself really was the academic accountability document or contract, so to speak. The first 3 elements of the charter, the educational program, the measurable people outcomes, and the methods for measuring those outcomes, really makes up the compact between the district and the charter school about academic accountability. And I would argue that if the charter school met the standards that it outlined in its charter, then it was subject to renewal. Now, at the time of renewal, the district could engage in a dialogue as to whether or not those goals were high enough or academically sound. With AB 1137 passing, a charter school cannot be renewed unless it makes a API progress in the last year, the growth target, that is, API growth over 2 years or an aggregate over 3 years, or scores essentially a 4.4 or better on a statewide or similar schools rank. And what I was telling Dr. Sarvis right now is that there appears to be the perspective that as long as the charter meets those standards and is otherwise meeting the academic outcomes specified in its charter, the default assumption is that the charter will be renewed. Now, there can be dialogue at that time about whether or not Article 2 should be amended to reflect some different outcome if, for example, the standards are low, or low as the district would otherwise advise. So right now, the way I interpret the law, and I think arguably a court might interpret the law, is if the charter otherwise meets the AB 1137 standards and meets its contractual obligation about academic accountability, the charter is subject for renewal. So I don't know, again, it's a really timely debate right now.
In this case, our board policy language, the language we just passed, and Ed Code are the same. That for renewal, we specify that the school must meet API growth for the last 2 out of 3 years or the last 1 year. What's up for renewal tonight is the MOU. This is simply a review of what the charter is, and we're asking you to approve the MOU. And since our board policy language specifies what is specified in the MOU, our recommendation is to approve this MOU.
Thanks, Mr. Meany. I know we also have representatives from Cesar Chavez here as well, if there are any questions. Board members, I mean, we've had a chance to see this before. As Mr. Gonzalez pointed out, the appendices were approved on November 28th. So it's the main body of the MOU that remains to be approved. Any questions, comments? Dr. Noel?
I had two. I'm not sure that these are questions or comments, or observations, whether they're specifically your case or whether I'm really talking about something more general. But on page 4 of 13, it talks about the programmatic audit. And to me, it's not fulfilling to read that we're going to that this talks about the kinds of data that will be prepared and presented without talking about how they're going to be interpreted and what consequences there are for data. And I don't know whether that's something that maybe that's a more general policy issue that we as a district should be looking at. But it's one thing to say summary data, they're going to produce summary data showing student progress and an analysis of this and that. And this isn't unique to Cesar Chavez's language. I read this elsewhere. But I'm always troubled by, and then what? And what if the data are not happy data, and we don't, that's not in the MOU, and as I say, I'm not sure whether this is the time or the moment to raise it. I do have one that I think is timely.
Well, may I address that?
Please do.
To my mind, what is critical is not what's in the MOU in terms of what they're going to deliver to us, but what's in the original charter.
Yeah.
And this applies to all charters, because the rigor that is demanded in the original charter is something that we need to be particularly cognizant of and need to be making decisions about at the time we originally charter the school.
Well, that's why I wasn't sure, because I'm aware that in the charter, when you talk about measurable student outcomes, I mean, it should be as rigorous as we're going to expect, should be spelled out. And I haven't gone back and read the Cesar Chavez charter for those outcomes.
Yes.
And I didn't know whether, and maybe the MOU is not the place then to try to leverage that discussion. I guess that's the one way to put it.
Well, I guess to my mind, once we've approved the charter based upon the charter language about the academic rigor,
Yeah.
then that's it.
That's it.
Our road is, our path is set.
And my sense is that Mr. Minnie would agree with that.
Yes,
Yeah,
unless
yeah.
you negotiate something else.
Yeah, all right. Now, all right, then that just leads me to one point. This MOU is scheduled to, the term of it is until the charter renewal time. The language is a little unclear there. It says
Yes.
it ends on the expiration date of the charter, October 12th, 2009. And And I just I would feel more comfortable to see that come back to the board one more time, one time in the meantime, to see the MOU come back for review. And again, though, I'm thinking out loud here, because what I really want to have come back for review is the progress of the school. And again, this probably just is the wrong place for that. And maybe the only vehicle we have is our annual review of the plans, yeah. As I think about that.
I think that's probably what you're asking for.
Yeah.
And we have, as Eva would say, we have had discussions about academic performance at the school and our expectations of them and their expectations of themselves.
Yeah.
I do know that there has been some question raised about the advisability of MOUs being for 1 year only. We've been developing MOUs and expecting them to expire at the end of the charter so that they're on the same cycle and we don't come back at them each year. Perhaps Mr. Minnie would like to address that. But in fact, we had another charter school that said, well, shouldn't we renegotiate our MOU every year? I would not welcome it.
Yeah. I think that's just it. I mean, how much time do you have? You've got the charter, the MOU, the facilities use agreement. And my recommendation, just for the sanity of everybody, is that you try to make them for the term of the charter. I think we've gotten to the point where we're pretty comprehensive and diligent, and everybody's exercising their due diligence and review of these documents. But if anything were to change in the law, certainly the agreement would have to comply. And then there's also provision in each agreement that says either party can propose, like your collective bargaining agreements, sort of reopeners that the parties can come back and negotiate. But it is, I think, just for administrative economies of scale to try to have them be longer.
If I could make a suggestion, this would be helpful to me. I don't know if it would be helpful to other board members, that when we do the single plans, they're always in the same format. But if for the charter schools, we could bring back the actual language from the provisions of this Ed Code section 47605, so that then we would be able to look at the data we're being presented with for the year and measure it against what the Ed Code is requiring, and that is reflected in the MOU. Just because we look at that data in a vacuum otherwise when it comes to charter schools. Does that make sense?
Perfect, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. My concerns have been allayed.
Thank you.
Well, it goes back to our discussion the last time we reviewed the school, where these issues came up, and there was, at that time, some talk about, well, let's wait until the MOU comes up. And now it's come up, and I realize that, and now's not the time either.
Any other questions or concerns? I think certainly my issues were addressed with Dr. Noel's line of questioning.
I guess I did have a question. I'm sorry, I missed this last post-it.
Okay.
On page 11 of 13, district services and fees, and it says, we're talking about this, the district shall charge the charter school a fee of 5% of the charter school total revenue for district services and fees. And I just wanted to ask Mr. Diaz particularly to talk about how well that covers costs and so on, because I know he's expressed concern about these issues.
With regards to Cesar Chavez, I don't have the specific detail in front of me, but at this, concurrently, we're working with Peabody, and we'll be reviewing Goleta as well, to do a more thorough analysis of how that 5% does cover those fees. We're actually breaking down the number of hours that it takes to process payroll, accounts payable, things that perhaps in the past we, and not exclusively with this district, but sort of operated with a blanket assumption that X number of dollars should, and I use that word should, cover these items. And I think right now we're doing a more thorough analysis to ensure that the 5% do cover those items. But as I sit here right this evening, unless Bob can give me information that we don't have right now, I can't say that the 5% covers exactly every cost, or that that it's too much or it's too little. So I'd like to be able to tell you that, but I can't.
Is it above the 1% supervisorial fee that is, I believe, provided in the statute?
Yes.
So the district the district always gets that. That has to do with the time we're spending right now supervising a charter school and all the things that the administrative staff do, I presume. So this is for specific services.
Yes.
Are you developing actually a rate structure?
No, sir. No, I don't think we'll, given the fact that the time taken to process information varies from school to school and from task to task, it's going to be very difficult to come up with an exact percentage number that covers exact costs. So we try to get over, you want to think in terms of the longer-term relationship with the charter, that over time that percentage will cover those costs. But at any point in time along that continuum, there may be times when it does, and there may be times when it doesn't. But over the long term, that it should.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any other questions or concerns? Or have we covered it? Nope. Is somebody
Move to
wishing make a
approve.
motion?
Move to approve the MOU without the modifications to section EE.1.
Okay.
Second?
Thank you, Ms. Parker. So Cordero and Parker, all those in favor of approving or adopting the modifications to the administrative, I'm sorry, I'm reading the wrong item. Approval of the memorandum of understanding with Cesar Chavez Charter School, signify by saying aye. I'm sorry.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. So it is approved unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to Mr. Minnie. Now we are on to our expulsion cases. Would someone like to jump in on case number 0607-45?
Yes, in case 0607-45, I move to approve the findings.
I apologize.
Yes?
I have two cases that are numbered the same on my summary sheet. Yeah. So let me turn to the actual item, E3, and see where we're at.
They are labeled correctly on the board agenda, but not on that summary sheet. The second case should be labeled 47.
Thank you. Okay, well then, let's move forward with 0607-45. Is there a motion? Yes.
Sorry. In 0607-45, I move to uphold the findings and recommendations of the hearing panel with the exception that the student be allowed to return to the district in August of '07.
Second by Ms. Malakoff. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any nays? It passes unanimously. So then in the case of 0607-47, which is the next case on our summary sheet. It's
In
not,
the case of 06-07-47, I move that the board uphold the findings and recommendations of the hearing panel.
Second?
thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So then we move on to the case of 0607-46.
In case 0607-46, I move to uphold the findings and recommendations of the hearing panel with the exception that the student be allowed to return in August of '07.
Thanks, Ms. Cordero. Second. Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Thank you. Case 0607-50.
For 0607-50, I move to uphold the recommendations of the hearing panel.
So that was Parker and Malakoff. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So it passes unanimously. And in the final case, 0607-36.
In the case of 06-07-36, I move that the board uphold the findings and recommendations of the hearing panel.
Thank you, Ms. Malakoff. So that was Noel and Malakoff. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 So it passes unanimously. Okay, that's it for our expulsions. Always goes so quickly in open session. It represents a lot of hard work in closed session. We are on to our conference agenda. Item F1, a continued discussion of budget reductions.
Well, as the agenda item shows, this is an ongoing discussion about possible budget reductions. Mr. Diaz gave a presentation at our last meeting. You have a handout on the dais, and for the members of the audience, it's on the side table, that show the slides that he's about to go through with you. Mr. Diaz is our Assistant Superintendent for Business Services.
May I ask,
Yes.
Mr. Diaz and Dr. Sarvis?
Yes.
I missed that presentation due to illness. I got a recording of it, and just before your presentation, the recording stopped playing back.
Oh, no.
So you were, it's just, in my household, it didn't work. And I just wonder, and perhaps maybe members of the audience and the public could just, and I certainly could use a little refresher on a summary of what you said at that presentation as a prelude to this one. Would that be asking too much?
I don't have it in front of me. I believe at that time we were, was that the first, no, it wasn't the first interim. It was what was addressing the need for budget reductions. It was based on information from our first interim and concerns that the County Office of Education and our auditors had with regards to the long-term sustainability of our current business model and operating model. And I presented some items to the board that evening, areas of concern that I was able to see in my short time here, which I felt were focus items that were, how should I say, challenges, budget challenges for a long-term sustainability, such as the size of our classes, such as the amount of special ed encroachment, and the need, in my opinion, of the board to consider at some time in not too distant future the closure of a school. The fact that many of the budget reductions have been made in the past few years are from what I will characterize as the low-hanging fruit, the typical items that enterprises go after in times of budget crisis, lowering supplies, lowering travel, lowering these types of things. And I'll submit to you, Dr. Noel, that my opinion was that in the aggregate, they didn't total or do not total enough money on a long-term basis to address our constant struggle to achieve a 3% reserve, specifically in our elementary budget. It's just those, they don't add up to enough money. So that my recommendation to you, to the board, was that at some point we will have to consider some of these other measures that are certainly much more difficult to achieve because of the political ramifications, because of the impact on our community, and all of those other attendant items. It's not simply taking a red pencil and telling somebody you're not going to get, we're going to reduce your paper supply, or we're going to reduce the number of pencils. You're actually talking about impacting our schools, our teachers, our children. So certainly those items need to be addressed, and the board is well aware of those items. And so I was really focusing on those things, Dr. Noel, of the need for us to look at those. And my specific concerns relative to what I perceived as I guess I would call it as an accountant, how to get out of the scramble mode in our accounting department. I think that we heard earlier this evening about how low our administrative ratio is and how lean we're running, and I think that's admirable as a whole, but I'll tell you, it's not such a great idea in your accounting department. And the result is your reports are not timely. The accuracy sometimes is questionable. And we've made great strides just in, not because I've been here, but since I started in November 1st, Mr. Wolf has actually been able to go back and do his job, which is to be the Director of Fiscal Services. For several months, he was doing his job and the position that I fill now, the vacant position. I just don't even know how it would be possible in a district like this, especially given the dual nature that the two districts, the common administration of two districts. I can't even imagine how Bob operated in August, September, and October. So it's no surprise to me that our first interim did not include all of the information that could have or possibly should have been posted to the books as of October 31st. Now, what I have for you tonight, though, kind of segueing into that, did I answer your question adequately? And I want to say also along those lines that Mr. Wolf has begun, actually proposed it in the late summer, well before I arrived here, some structural changes to the accounting department with regards to maximizing the utilization of the resources there. And it will be soon that those personnel changes will be reflected, and I want to say they'll be reflected in an increased quality of information from our financial system, both in the timeliness and the accuracy of the information. Bob has made some structural changes with regards to some job classification changes that will give us more flexibility so that we can create the kind of team that will provide the information that the board and the community in our schools needs to make the decisions that you must going forward. Now, that being said, what I've done tonight is I wanted to give you a snapshot of the process of budget review. One of the things that I did promise at our last meeting, I need to get a glass of water. I'm getting dry here. I'm suffering from the ailment that our youngster from Santa Barbara High talked about, that flu bug, and I've been just struggling along here. Thank you, Rob.
Stay away from those schools.
No, I marvel at the constitutions of our principals and teachers. They just are absolutely iron. They just don't get sick. I can't.
Teachers are known to develop an immunity to everything.
They are just iron-willed individuals, and they have my highest respect. What I did promise at our last meeting was that it was one thing for me to stand up here and tell you all the things that we needed to do. I did say I'm going to be back at the next meeting and show you the actual adjustments that we can make, that we will make to begin reflecting these positive changes in our budget. So what I've done tonight was I want to point to the, first of all, the data that you see tonight will be based on just District 17, our elementary district. The journal numbers that you see, next, there's two columns there, journal number, increase or decrease. The journal numbers, I will go over two of them here shortly. They're the actual accounting, entries. Oh, thanks, Bob. They're the actual input into our financial system, the document that goes into our financial system. I'll go over this one here shortly, and I'll go over another one shortly. They are the line-by-line items that the staff goes through the budget line by line, and they find things that either one would cause, for instance, increase or decrease. What does that mean? Those items will cause the ending fund balance to increase or decrease. Well, the items that would cause the ending fund balance to increase, for instance, would be revenues that were received but had not been budgeted, or expenses that were less than anticipated. Now, as the board knows, budgeting is an inexact science. We are projecting what we think we're going to receive. We're projecting what we think we're going to expend. Accounting, on the other hand, is a very exact science. It is there are debits and there are credits. So what we have here is a ongoing process to reconcile between what we thought we were going to receive during the budget planning process last year and spend during the last year, and what we've actually received and or spent through this year. Now, I want to show you that as this is just a snapshot of what, seven of our adjustments just for the elementary district. There are many more I could have added to the list, but for the sake of brevity, I didn't want to cover the screen with tons of information. I really wanted to walk you through the process, how this is done. I can tell you that as of right now, that number has already changed just since this afternoon, because Shirley and Patty and Bob were busy all afternoon entering data as we speak. So the budget is a living document that changes constantly throughout the year based on information that's available at October 31st, for instance, being the first interim, January 31st, which we're working on now, being the second interim. So I can, and we'll go over couple of the journal items, but at this point, we have identified that have actually been entered into the books now. These are not proposed entries. These are entries that have been entered into our financial system. We have identified items in the unrestricted general fund area. All these are in the general fund. I just wanted to highlight the areas that we really had been talking the most about. As you can see, we found a couple more items totaling over $200,000 that were unbudgeted expenses. For instance, in the Object 5000 series, we found an additional $118,000, $119,000 of expenditures that had not been budgeted. We found in that same category, including some supplies, we found another $100,000 that had not been budgeted. Now, on the positive side, going into the special education resources of the general fund, we found $907,000 of items that had been budgeted but not spent. Now, this was a result of and Joanne was the first to hear last Friday when I came upon this. I felt so badly because I had been up here making such an issue. Now, this is not to say that we don't have special ed encroachment. This is not to say that it isn't significant. But I wanted to stand up here and take my whipping like a man after going and ranting and raving about her special ed. So I did talk to Joanne and say we're really going through it line by line and making sure that absolutely everything was accurate to the T. I think it's important to know this isn't new money. This isn't found money. Please don't go spend it. That number has already changed, up or down, I can't tell you. But this will be a different number tomorrow as these number of journal numbers increase. I've got a stack of them, and they're positive and they're negative. I could have brought you those that just showed all negative. I could have brought you those that just showed you all positive. But I wanted you to get a flavor of the scope, if you will, of how those adjustments work. I can tell you right at this point, we've identified items as of this afternoon when this was prepared. I prepared this that show a increase of our ending balance in our elementary school of $1,140,000. Now, Davis, can you slide back up to the top of the page, please? This is the part to remember right here. Okay, these numbers are a partial list of the adjustments that are continuing to be made ongoing. We will present to the board the second interim report March 27th. It's due March the 15th. I don't see how it's possible to get the level of detail and the time for analysis that I know the superintendent has demanded of our staff and myself. So we need time to get it right. We need to get it to you right. So it's going to be on March 27th that we will have a complete list of all of the adjustments. They'll be in the second interim report. Now, just for the sake of brevity, I'm going to go over one of these journals with you. And we're not going to spend much time on it because it's just a bunch of, you'll see why we're not going to spend a bunch of time on it. Davis, put, let's see, I want to get one that, the two, yeah, the
Page 1.
let's see, the second, yeah. just put that, put the first, this is the first page. Now, if this doesn't put you to sleep, nothing will.
You know what? I want to stop you, Mr. Diaz, only because I'm worried that we're straying from what we've agendized.
Okay.
Which is continued discussion of budget reductions. So I don't object to us going down this path as long as you're leading us in the direction of a budget reduction
Yes,
discussion.
yes, President Harder. The first sheet, the summary sheet, the first, Davis, go back to the first sheet, please. These are the budget reductions. These items. These items have been entered into our financial system, and these are, in fact, budget reductions that have resulted in an increase in our ending fund balance at this point in time of $1,140,000. So to stay within the context of our discussion of budget reduction, and Davis, if you could return, and not to belabor that point, but let's go down and go to the second page. These are the account codes, the debits and the credits. You can see how they added up. If we can increase the size there, David, you can, okay. You can see that number, $118,863, coincides with the $118,863 on the budget reduction page. And if you like, I can put another one up there, but my intent, Ms. Harder, was to show you that, yes, these adjustments have been made into our system, and to call them budget reductions, or I think budget adjustments are a more fair characterization. Budget adjustments that result in reductions in expenditures and an increase to our ending balance. Okay?
But no programmatic cuts.
No programmatic cuts at this time. We're going through the budget line by line, Dr. Noel, to make sure that everything that we put into the budget last spring and last summer, we want to make sure all those items are completely accurate line by line before we start doing any programmatic cuts.
Okay. So this is all a prelude to
Yes.
setting an agenda.
Yes.
Thank you. I think budget adjustment is a better description
Yes.
because budget reductions would be a board activity.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, and we will be there'll be a time later in the spring when we will bring to you items for action as budget reductions. These are budget adjustments that will result in a increase or decrease in our ending balance. Okay? Thank you.
Lights up.
Any questions? Any other questions?
Any questions for Mr. Diaz from the board?
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
I'm not sure whether this is supposed to be comforting or makes me nervous. In that, it makes me feel like that we're moving back and forth, and it's nice to feel like we have a budget that can be pinned down. So I'm not sure how I'm reacting to this.
I would be comforted in the fact that is a positive number, not a negative number, right now, and to the extent that the other level of comfort should apply to the fact that those numbers are very accurate based on line-by-line analysis that the staff has had time to do, that Mr. Wolf has had time to do, to take the time. It takes a tremendous amount of time. I want to say there's, in a typical school district budget, there are something like 4,000 to 6,000 object codes. So multiply that times 2. So that's 12,000, and then multiply the activity that takes place in those codes, and you see that 4 people, it's a big task, but they have to have time to do it. They have to be able to sit there and grind through this work line by line.
Thank you. I think it's extremely reassuring, though, to know that you're going through it with this level of detail. Ms. Cordero.
Yes, and I appreciate this too, and I understand sort of the sort of state of flux that we may be in terms of how you said these are a partial list, but it is I agree with Ms. Harder. It is reassuring to know that we can get down to this level of specificity in terms of trying to accurately represent what's in the budget. I have what may be a naive question. I was just wondering if you could explain why there would be an encroachment from special education if there is $907,000 that have been budgeted but not spent.
In the simplest context, Ms. Cordero, an encroachment would take place when the expenditures for any program, whether it be special ed, transportation, anything, when the expenditures exceed the revenues for that program. And I can tell you with complete certainty that even though we have identified an item that was an over-budgeted expenditure, it doesn't come near to mitigating the complete encroachment of special ed.
Okay, so I understand. So the encroachment was more than the $907,000.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Significantly more.
Yes, I understand that now.
I'd like to enter on behalf of some constituents that many people in the community, and this is not a criticism of, it's a criticism of education jargon. Many people in the community really find the term encroachment odious when it applies to special education, that it is pejorative, it has the wrong kind of connotations, and the more neutral term you use, I forget exact wording. But,
Contribution.
That we're talking about unbalanced books, about spending more, having to make up out of unrestricted funds for items that could not be covered with the monies provided by the state and the federal government. But it's just such an unfortunate term that I had to enter that.
And it isn't a pejorative term, Dr. Noel.
For an
Encroachment.
accountant, I know it's not.
I understand that,
And
I
I know Mr. Wolf was taught me that there are about 6 areas where there are, quote, encroachments.
I was going to say, that's not the only program or area of our budget let's don't even call it encroachment, let's just say where expenditures exceed the revenues
There's an
received.
accounting code number for that word, right?
No, there's no account number for encroachment.
85
It's
something
just when
like
you
that.
add up the debits and the credits, the expenditures exceed the revenues. I would just like if Davis would focus up, just slide up just a little bit, Davis. In the simplest context, I tried to put it as simply as possible, things that would cause your ending balance to either go up or go down. And the things that would cause your ending balance to increase, as we show, are revenues that were received but not budgeted. And they may have been a grant or a program to come in after the budget process, so it wouldn't have been included in the budget, or expenses that were less than anticipated. Perhaps we budgeted an item at a certain amount and it came in lower. So those would be the types of things that would cause your expenses or your ending balance to go up or down. And then the converse is true with a decrease. So you would have expenses that were greater than anticipated or revenues that were budgeted but not received for whatever reason. So we just sometimes, and when you prepare budgets, I don't like to use the term rollover budget, but they've certainly, it's been the practice in many districts. It's not a good practice to engage in. It is the result of not having the time to do a line-by-line budget analysis and only enter the actual expenditures that you're 100% clear on, and the same with revenues. I've done it before in other districts. I've had to do a rollover budget, is what you call that. It's not a good thing to do. And then people adjust them at first and second interim. I'm not saying that that was done here. I wasn't here during that time, but I've had to do it myself in other districts. Many accountants and CBOs throughout the state have to do it. This, for the simple reason that they don't have the time to sit down during April, May, and June and go line by line. You say, well, does it look next year like it looked this year? And
Thanks.
you go on that basis.
Great, thanks, Mr.
Yes,
Diaz.
ma'am.
And I don't think that this is a year to be even talking about a rollover budget. I think you've been laying a really solid foundation for a board that's probably pretty eager to engage in budget reduction discussions for for the upcoming budget year. Any further comments or questions for Mr. Diaz? Thank you. We are scheduled for a break now. Do people want a break now? Yes? Okay, yes. People say they want a break now. Okay, we will break for 15 minutes. We're ahead of ourselves anyway. Thank you. 15-minute break. Okay, we are back in session after a 15-minute break, and we are on to item F2, report on revisions of Peabody Charter, Memorandum of Understanding, and Charter Facilities Use Agreement. So the whole enchilada for discussion only this evening.
Well, let me introduce the topic, then I'll introduce once again Paul Minnie. Peabody Charter School was a conversion charter. It serves a neighborhood attendance area with both certificated and classified employees who are employees of the elementary district. We've been meeting with Peabody since last spring to discuss greater autonomy on the part of the school, and specifically to discuss the provision for the school to be able to exercise more control over hiring and personnel policies. The school has also taken the opportunity to revise their charter. You'll hear about that from Kate Ford in just a moment. And our Memorandum of Understanding. A number of revisions in the charter and the MOU will be reviewed. We won't spend a lot of time highlighting those because board members may have questions about other areas. But I do particularly want Kate to dwell on things like enrollment priorities. Since the school serves some 119 students from Santa Barbara School District schools and 104 students from other school districts, 2 issues remain unresolved. Well, actually 3 issues. I didn't know this at the time, but you may have seen that we left blank the actual pro rata share. We're still in discussions about that issue. We left blank the charge for specific services, and that's on attachment A for the specialized services that the charter school would receive from the district. And we just recently heard from our special education attorney asking for language changes in a couple of special ed areas. So we'll be talking with the school about that as well. And I believe that Joanne Pulley has already talked to you, Kate. Good. So with that, I'd like to introduce once again Paul Minnie, who will talk about the process to move the school toward greater independence. And I say that advisedly because there's really no such thing as a completely independent school. I mean, they're our school in many ways. The district is responsible for those students. A lot of state operations come through the district to go to the charter and so forth.
Yeah, I thought I would just start with a little bit of background, just maybe a little historical context as well, because for those of you who are new to the board and may not have all that much experience working in charter schools, essentially charter schools can be organized on 2 ends of continuum. One, those that are very dependent and those that are very independent. The dependent ones are the schools that have all the employees of the employees of the district. They're indirectly funded.
Oh, excuse me, your microphone's
I
off.
think it's on.
Is that better?
Oh, yeah.
There we go. Thanks.
Wonder what that symbol, you had that, okay. Thought you were just real happy what I was saying about this. And the independent schools are nonprofit public benefit corporations. They are directly funded, they are nonprofits, they are the employer of record, they handle all the collective bargaining, they are unto themselves little mini school districts, but like Dr. Sarvis said, with a certain level of oversight by the District Board of Education. The Charter Schools Act was amended a number of years ago to specifically recognize that charter schools can be operated as nonprofit public benefit corporations. And they did that, the legislature did that, primarily to insulate the district from the debts and liabilities of the charter school. They wanted to create an entity that could run the school, and a nonprofit can run a public type agency. There's business improvement districts and hospital districts and charter schools now that are operated as public entities, but in this separate entity form. So if there's a debt or an obligation or liability, the district's insulated from those, assuming that it's doing its proper oversight. And thankfully, I'm here to report, as far as I know, over the last 14 years of the Charter Schools Act, not a single district has yet been found liable for the debts and obligations of the charter school. So that's the good news. Peabody was a hybrid. You had Cesar Chavez and Santa Barbara Charter School that were more on the independent end of the spectrum. Peabody, as a long-time conversion school, I believe it converted back in 1993, back in the year that the law first took effect, had a great, has and still continues to have a great working relationship with the district, but had this unusual, I will say, and hard to describe from a legal perspective, relationship where the employees were employees of the district and the school had high levels of autonomy and decision-making, but also had the ability to hire its own employees. So you had a really unusual relationship with Peabody, which is difficult to describe and hard to confine for purposes of liability because they were overseeing your employees and had their own employees, and I guess that led to some difficulties, for example, in union issues. And so that, along with some of the protection for the district of independence, and as Dr. Sarvis said, ideas and thoughts and interest about maintaining a certain level of more localized control, led them to talk to the district, contact our office about how they might achieve independence. And again, that would be moving from the middle, I would say, out to the end of independent operation, where they would operate as a nonprofit public benefit corporation. So if the board approves the charter amendments and the revisions to the MOU, the charter school would become, as a nonprofit public benefit corporation, operate as a charter school, its own, as I said, little mini school district. It's going to hire its own employees. It's going to handle all of its own labor negotiations. It'll have its own collective bargaining agreement. It will be responsible for providing all of its own centralized services. Now, it can do that through a contract with the district, which is discussing for the district to provide certain services like payroll and accounts payable and those types of things. Or there are outside third-party vendors that provide those services for charter schools up and down the state. It'll be separately insured. It will indemnify the district. It's responsible for all of its own contracts with no liability to the district. It will have all of its own policies. It will have to, at a certain point, kind of replicate some of the infrastructure, fiscal services, policies, and health and safety policies, et cetera, that the district has onto itself. It will handle all the legal compliance. It will comply with the Brown Act, the Public Records Act, the Political Reform Act. The board members will have to do Form 700 filings, as you've all experienced. So again, that's probably the good analogy. So when you're thinking about and you're reading these documents, you can understand the level of responsibility. Now, the district still has supervisorial oversight, again, as Dr. Sarvis said, but with this relationship, as an independent school, it's very clear. The line is much more clearly drawn. They employ all the employees, and they're responsible for all hiring and firing decisions. The school district has the obligation to monitor the charter school, do nothing less than an annual site visit, double check to make sure with the fiscal reports that are coming in, they monitor the fiscal condition of the school. That's what the law says. We're not entirely sure what it means, but it means you should obviously be watching out for issues, as the business office will do, to make sure that the school isn't running into debt or burning through its reserve or having fiscal difficulties. The school, once approved, this more or less will take effect in the next fiscal year. So there will be a transitionary period as a conversion school with an agreement between the district, the charter, and the unions on how employees would elect at the time this would take effect to become employees of the charter school. What period of time they would have after that to return to the district if they did not want to stay at the charter school. And I understand maybe Dr. Robinson can speak to the specifics of that those agreements are pretty much, I think, coming together, and I think the union and the employees are all on board. So tonight you're presented with a redrafted charter petition. And it may look a little different than the Cesar Chavez and the Santa Barbara Charter School because it's drafted in the new Model State Board format. So the Model State Board of Education format is a little different than the original 16 elements that fell in a row because the State Board felt that there were some things and information missing that they wanted to see, and they also felt that the 16 elements were not well organized. You had, employee issues here, and you had student issues here and admissions here, so they grouped them together. So it's a little different format, but you'll see a table up front that cross-correlates it to the old format. Again, just by a little bit of background, I've met with the Charter Schools Board. We've talked about all the pros and cons. We've talked about these documents. They've been approved by the Charter Schools Board. I know the Charter School and the district have met a number of times to address initial concerns with both the charter, the MOU, and the facilities use agreement. And I know Kate is going to come up and be more detailed on the specifics of some of those changes, as I can as well. And certainly I'm here to answer questions about any of these documents after Kate's presented on her issue.
Good evening, Board. I definitely want to thank, first of all, Dr. Sarvis for inviting me to be a part of this presentation tonight. These documents have been written to support and enhance our desire to become more autonomous and to become a more independent charter school. And I also want to thank Paul Minnie, because as I was listening to him talk, I'm thinking, maybe Paul and I have talked too much, because I was thinking, I wanted to say that. No, you were saying that? No, I wanted to say that. But in any case, his wise and experienced counsel and assistance has made all the difference to my board and my staff and to me. This night is a really important one for Peabody, and I thought at least I could give you the perspective from me, and for my parents and my staff. Because these documents that you have now don't only represent a great amount of thought, a great amount of consideration, discussion, analysis, some argument, and lots of effort, but we have kind of anticipated this moment for a long, long time. Probably kind of like Martin Scorsese felt on Academy Awards night on Sunday night, or I liken it kind of to a law school student who can't wait to open his or her own practice and may become a partner, or like newlyweds who look forward to buying their own home together and starting a life together. For Peabody, this effort has been nothing short of exciting and challenging and rewarding. It is the natural next step in the progression of our school, and the parents and the staff believe that as strongly as I do. After 15 years of the district's support and guidance, we seek your blessings in this move to independence. Just to remind you, as Paul did, that the effort started over a year ago, before I was with the school and the district, with parents and teachers working together under the leadership of Pat Morales. And in fact, when I was interviewed for the position of principal, which is now almost a year ago, some of the questions were directly related to greater autonomy for the school and the expectation that the principal would keep the process moving and achieve independence this year. So I have really tried to do that, and so far I think we're right on schedule. There are 3 elements that are essential to this effort, and as you know, you received the copies of them as part of your board packet. And as Paul said, he was very instrumental in, he didn't say he was instrumental, but he was, in providing us with some great templates and most state-of-the-art and up-to-date templates for the documents that led them to become more detailed and perhaps more formal than the original Peabody documents that you've seen or other charter schools. So if they look a bit foreign to you, it's because in this process we are really trying to seek to be clearer and more detailed about what is the school's mission and what are the expectations of Peabody and what are our intentions going forward. For example, as you saw, the charter document references charter law throughout it and provides great detail in many ways. It will become and can become the beginning of a board policy binder. So very, very little of the substance of these documents is new, but they look new because of it. It's also important to note that the documents that you received were the writing and editing effort of numerous Peabody board meetings, and also of 2 joint meetings that were held by with a Peabody team of staff and parents, Paul, and also district officials, most of whom are here tonight. And that the documents that you've received reflect general consensus on the content and the wording, with the exception of what Dr. Sarvis mentioned a few moments ago. So I'd like to highlight a couple of things for you. First of all, as Paul said, and as I think Dr. Sarvis referenced, the documents completely clarify the legal relationship of the school and the district, and that addresses issues such as property, furnishing, equipment, maintenance, employees, program materials, etc. The state and federal guidelines and laws are addressed, data collection is addressed, revenue sources and anticipated expenses and who's responsible for them are stated specifically. clarifying the school's responsibility, clarifying the district's oversight when it comes to everything, up to and including discipline, special education, English language learners, etc. Very important for us, and it's been stated more than once, is that Peabody will be the employer of record, a mini school district, if you will. All classified, all credentialed, and all administrative personnel will belong solely to Peabody, with the exception of special education personnel. And that includes negotiations, grievances, compensation, the calendar, all become the responsibility of Peabody. The school will continue to be direct funded and responsible for all services, almost all services, and all expenses, including utilities, routine maintenance, insurance, curriculum, instructional materials. However, the district, as you know now, will charge a pro rata share or an additional oversight fee, not unlike rent, but calculated based upon the district's facility expenses and Peabody's rightful and fair share of those expenses. And while this hasn't been agreed upon, the statewide average is between 80 cents and $1.50 or so per square foot. So for example, at $1 per square foot of classroom space, Peabody would pay the district about $54,000 for pro rata, plus a percentage of revenues for oversight. And then Peabody will also, as we said, contract for some administrative services, probably fewer than we do now, for a set annual amount. This also will probably be a % of revenues to be agreed upon at a later date. And you do have a tentative list of those services in Exhibit A. There is more. We did create more affirmation statements in the revised charter in order to acknowledge our responsibility to meet all laws and also all district accountability measures. You'll see that there. We also set an attendance goal of 95% for each student because we believe good attendance makes all the difference, and we intend to track it and be held accountable for it. Also, parents and students at Peabody will sign enrollment contracts regarding behavior, attendance, and grades. The MOU clearly outlines the admissions and enrollment procedures, as Dr. Sarvis referenced, with a priority enrollment list specified this time also. And the group that governs the school is now called the Board of Directors, and its duties and the principles are clearly outlined in the charter. They all reflect greater accountability for fiscal management, for legal responsibility, and for student achievement. And finally, Peabody will become a 501c3 nonprofit public benefit corporation, as Paul said, operating autonomously from the district, and the district will not be liable for the debts and obligations of the school or for any claims that arise from errors, omissions, etc. on the part of Peabody. The final conclusion, as you saw, of the charter renewal document states that we pledge to work cooperatively with the district and to work to present the strongest possible proposal for this renewal. I hope we have done that for you. Last week, I received notification from the California Department of Education that Peabody Charter is a Title I Academic Achievement Award school. This, in addition to the 2 prior Distinguished School Awards, plus the fact that Peabody met the API growth goals again this year with an increase of 28 points school-wide, and the fact that our school also met or exceeded state targets in English language arts and mathematics for all learner groups, plus the fact that we have 743 students virtually fully enrolled, and we have 110 kindergarten applications already from our former attendance area only for the fall. Parent support and staff expertise at Peabody are unparalleled. We expect the relationship with the district to continue as one of great affection, great support, and mutual respect, and we intend to call on the district when we can for assistance and guidance as needed. So we hope that you will consider these renewal documents and give us a stamp of approval on March 13th, or maybe the Santa Barbara Elementary School District's version of the Academy Award for the charter school, deserving greater independence. We do have much work to do still, and we want to get started on the next steps. Thanks.
Thanks, Ms. Ford, particularly for highlighting the changes. Thanks, Mr. Meany. I'm sure there are board questions and comments. This is the first time through. It will be back, as Ms. Ford indicated, on a future agenda for approval. So if we could do this in an organized fashion rather than a back and forth, if Ms. Cordero, you would be prepared to begin, and then we can just move up the desk. And I think we also have, Ms. Ford, a couple of your members of your board of directors.
Here, Laura Smith and Glenn Miller is also the treasurer of our foundation.
Great. So it sounds like we have a panel of people who can respond to just about any question.
Should I sit down?
No, stay right there.
No such luck.
You know, I'm not sure I have a whole lot of questions here. I'm interested in what you were talking about, the oversight obligations for the charter school and for the district. And if you could just specify a little bit more how the oversight will work in terms of, I think we were talking about moving more of the responsibility to the charter itself.
Well, yes. We have, Paul began to discuss with you just the general specifics of the district's oversight. And what page is that one on? In the MOU, 6 of 19?
I'm looking at 6 of 19 on D.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, perhaps Dr. Sarvis, you'd like to address that?
Well, are you asking about district oversight?
Yes.
And this is standard oversight in fact, we have most of this in board policy, D1A and oversight obligations. We have in terms of monitoring performance and compliance of the charter school, visiting the charter school, ensuring that the charter school submits the reports and documents identified, monitoring the fiscal condition. These are our standard oversight responsibilities on the part of the district.
Okay, and we're saying that's pretty much what it's going to be
in place and will continue to be
limited to.
Although, if you continue throughout that section, you have obligations on the part of the charter school to provide us with information on a regular basis so that we can carry out our oversight responsibilities. And that goes for pages.
Yes, it does.
And just to add, you have a right at any time to make a request of any document of the charter school as the oversight agency. And so one of the sort of inherent or implied provisions for oversight would be that at any time you know or have reason to believe that there might be a problem in the area of charter compliance, legal compliance, achieving people outcomes, or fiscal management, then you have not only the right, but probably the obligation to make an inquiry of the school to get whatever information you need to make an informed decision of whether or not there's a problem in one of those 4 areas. So this is, the minimum standards are stated on 6 of 19. The additional information that's included that follows, as Dr. Sarvis said, is additional information that most districts and this district would like to see on a more regular basis. But anything else, our organization operates transparently for the school district purposes.
Okay.
And I think it's more, it's explained in more detail in this particular MOU, but most of these are in place, again, already.
Okay, I think that actually is the only specific question that I had. I think some of the other questions that I had, you actually kind of touched on and clarified for me. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Park.
Okay, I've got a few questions. One is hopefully just a quick formatting question. In the MOU revisions that you supplied, changes were in red, correct?
Right, yeah, that was our last round of
Okay.
changes between the charter school and the
But just this last round, because as
Just
I was
the
going
last
through and I saw, okay, human resources management, there's clearly been changes here, but they're not in red.
Right.
So it was just a little hard for me to figure out if that was from an original or actually just from a previous draft. Is that so?
Apologize, it's the last version, the naming convention that we always use in our firm, if you look where it says at the footer, Peabody MOU version 4, with the date. So that's our fourth version of this
Fourth version
MOU
of this one.
negotiations.
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha. Okay, my next question is from the petition, page 32 of 47, which is the student admissions, attendance, and suspension expulsion policies. And my question there is, in the first paragraph, it says, as required by law, preference for enrollment in Peabody Charter School will be given to those who live within the former attendance area of the school, because it's a conversion charter. But then, as you go down to, if the school has more applicants than there are spaces for, and it goes into a random drawing, enrollment priority in the case of a public random drawing shall be allowed in the following priority. One is for current and returning charter school students, which makes sense to me. But then number 2 is siblings of currently enrolled district charter school students. Then number 3 is children of school employees. And it's not until number 4 that you get to district residents living in the former attendance area of Peabody. So my question is, if we are, by law, preference for enrollment should be students within the former boundaries, shouldn't number 4 actually be number 2? Shouldn't it be above siblings of existing students and children of employees?
The way that the statutes have been interpreted by the Department of Education is that you have to have a preference for prior attendance area students. It doesn't say where in the hierarchy of preferences that falls. So a lot of the times.
But then that's not really a preference.
Well, it is still in the sense that it falls before the rest of in-district students and out-of-district students. And even the US DOE non-regulatory guidance that speaks to this issue will say that typically charter schools will have founders' parents' preferences or other preferences as may be allowed by law. Performing arts schools have admissions preferences for people who have a certain level of performing arts capabilities. That probably didn't come out exactly the way it should. But so the law has been interpreted in such a way as to make sure that you have that in prior attendance area preference somewhere ahead of out-of-district students. This is almost the same as the prior charter, with the exception of they tightened it up for in-district students by adding on number 2, siblings of enrolled in-district students. So you'll see number 6 is siblings of currently enrolled out-of-district students. So again, trying to increase the concentration of in-district students.
Well, this order is something that I would have a concern with, but another question that I have on the district side, I don't know how this would work, is obviously for our inter-district transfers, we try to give priority now for those that are from program improvement schools. And I don't know if that's come up in the discussions at all, because clearly if that were something that were a regular boundaried school, we'd be trying to give preferences to those that were under sanction from the NCLB.
Robin, why don't you address that?
You know, interestingly enough, we searched and searched for some clarity on what kinds of rights parents from a program improvement school had in regards to being able to name a specific school. And we recently had several of our staff members go to a Title I conference and ask like 3 different people, and it was unanimous that the parent does have that right. And that was since we've worked with Peabody on this. Now, what we did, so that's something we will need to consider, and that we'll need to follow the law on that. What we did do in looking at this, we also had questions. We had quite a lengthy conversation about this priority list, and Paul was really good about kind of playing out the way for the length of this charter for the renewal. And Kate showed you, or shared with you, that she has over 110 former attendance area kindergarten students applying right now. That as we looked at that and where that falls, it kind of limits it right there. I mean, those are there are not very many.
How many spaces do you have for kindergartners this year?
100.
100.
100. So you're already going to be there's going to be a lottery. So if there's a lottery, then students that come from employees will be ahead of those that are boundaried.
Yes.
And
Yes.
students that
And
that
students who are siblings of already enrolled students, and they don't even have to be living within the district.
It says currently enrolled in district.
Exactly.
They could have moved out, I suppose, but.
That's exactly right.
Right, that's correct.
So you're going to face this situation immediately.
We will,
Right.
exactly, like next week or soon. Yes, right. As we played it out, however, the number of those students, I mean, there are some, obviously, it's going to happen. it kind of worked its way into where very shortly it will be pretty much all attendance area as those families are gone. I mean, there will still be some, and we've got the employees, but as we sat and talked about it, to us, it seemed like it was a realistic piece. Now, of course, the board has every right to, question that, talk about it.
I do, and I also think that, of course, when we may think that it's only 4 or 5, but I can tell you those families will feel like it's incredibly important that a sibling from another boundaried school has what they'll consider their space because they live in that neighborhood. So I think that that's going to come up, and that'll be concern.
I just want to piggyback on this because while what you're suggesting with the numbers of potential incoming kindergartners who live within the former enrollment boundaries, it exceeds the number of spaces. So yes, it would be complying with the spirit, but I would rather see something that reflects. That's exactly right. Yep. Because, while yes, the class will be filled with students who live within those boundaries, what would happen in future years? It may not reflect those students. Students may be.
Let me go back over this for just a moment. When we looked at the numbers of students in the attendance area who are being served by the school at about 500 students, then we looked at the number of students outside the attendance area, over 200 students. We initially thought that that simply by putting siblings of currently enrolled in-district charter students ahead of in-district residents and then siblings of currently enrolled out-of-district charter students that we would be able to accommodate the students in the attendance area, then accommodate students who were from other schools in the district, and finally serve students outside of the district, and that would take a period of time. Well, as we see, we're already in trouble on that. We already have more students from the attendance area than we have spaces for in kindergarten this next year.
And another thing that came up in our discussion is that we can't change boundaries. This even if we changed boundaries in our district, this charter school has the attendance area of the former attendance area,
No,
and
thank
that
you for bringing
stays
that up.
the same.
That's very interesting to know. Good. My other 2 questions are about facilities. So on the facilities use agreement, I just noticed on page 4 of 9, obviously you haven't come up with a pro rata share yet, but I have a couple of questions about that. One is, the pro rata share charge shall not be charged on the square footage of the classrooms included in the Exploration Center. And why is that left out? Just curious on.
We figured that the school had been so active in raising funds for those 2 parts of the Exploration Center that we simply would not include that in the formula.
Did we not pay for part of that?
Well, we paid for the central library part of it, but there was an additional $2.7 million that was a result of fundraising from the school.
But any improvements to the hardscape there, so to speak,
Yes.
they do belong to the district, is that correct?
Yes, they do belong to the
Okay,
district.
I just wanted to
Yes.
be clear on that. And then the range you gave of the average of what districts are charging, that 89 cents to $1.50 per square foot.
Something.
Around there. Is that, I mean, if that is a lot less than the facilities costs that a district, if you average that out per square foot, if that's quite a bit less, is that considered, I mean, at $50,000 or so for Peabody, is that considered substantially rent-free if it's so much lower than, I mean, how are other districts doing that? Are they even, maybe they're charging a school $50,000 at $1 a square foot, but are they then being considered as supplying that facility substantially rent-free?
Let me, in fact, I'm going to turn to Paul for a discussion of this whole concept of pro rata share, but let me say, first of all, I didn't expect to have a discussion about what that actual amount ought to be. Our last calculation was $3.32, I think, per square foot, and that pushes $200,000, as I recall. And we're still having that discussion. But Paul, I'd like you to weigh in on the Ed Code language on pro rata share and why it isn't rent per se.
Right. To be probably the most direct, though, to your question, the state board regs, which are currently pending revision on Prop 39, are being revised, at least proposed by the state board in their last meeting, to say that if you charge pro rata share, it's not substantially rent-free. And the history behind that was that the original section 47613 that was added to allow a school district to charge the higher oversight amount was added prior to Prop 39, and it said districts have an obligation to allocate otherwise idle facilities to charter schools. And if you do that, you can charge the higher oversight from 1% to 3% because they figured districts spend about 2% of their general fund each year proportionately across facilities to maintain them. Most of the maintenance comes from restricted funds, developer fees, bond monies, deferred maintenance account, that sort of thing. So when Prop 39 passed and allowed the pro rata share calculation, if you look at the pro rata share calculation, it's the same. It was about the same 2%. It was supposed to be made up of a proportionate share of the district's general fund expenditures on facilities costs. And so if you look at the history, they should have, at the same time they passed Prop 39, eliminated the higher oversight fee for providing substantially rent-free facilities because they were intended to compensate the district for the same thing. That's why the state board's considering adding the language. So I think that addresses your question. But it's not, and then maybe to get to the same question is, and what Dr. Sarvis is saying, it's not rent in the sense that you can't compare it to fair market value for the facility. I'm sure the facility is worth millions, like anything is in Santa Barbara. It's intended to, just kind of like the word encroachment from special education, and I know that's not the best term, help the district compensate, provide its proportionate share of reimbursement for the general fund encroachment for facilities costs. And so it's only supposed to represent the charter school's sort of fair share of that general fund expenditure, which, again, in some school districts, because they aren't spending a lot of money out of their general fund on facilities, I think Pasadena's at 39 cents a square foot, and I had someone call me the other day and say it was 24 cents a square foot. So as districts cut back expenditures out of their general fund on facilities, that number can go down. It can go way up. For example, at Sac City, it was $4 a square foot because they purchased their administrative building using certificates of participation, which is, Mr. Diaz will tell you, is a general fund reimbursement. So it can vary all over the place, but.
Was that it?
I think that's it for me.
Thank you. Dr. Noel?
No, I think you may have done it for me too. I was interested in the two areas of where you had not concluded. Would you like to, that was one of them we just talked about, right? What's the other one?
Services?
Could you talk a little bit more about that, about those?
Well, if you look on Exhibit A, we've tried to
Exhibit A is at the very end of
the MOU. Sorry. If you take
Page
a look at
20
that, we have tried
21
to
of
come
19.
up. Right. We yeah, that was, I thought that too. And then there's.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Kate. Go ahead.
No, just that we have tried to make a new list, a rather comprehensive list of the services we'd like to receive from the district, and we're working with the district to establish, as Ed mentioned, the value of each one of those. Keeping in mind that as of this time, we pay 4% of our revenues, and will for the remainder of this school year. So the percentage, and this is a substantially different list, and it's a reduced list, and more specific.
Let me address this as well. If you look at Exhibit A, this looks quite a bit unlike the original list that we had in our last MOU, and it's because there's so much more specificity in this list. We have left the issue of the charge for these specific services until we resolve the issue of pro rata share. Once we resolve that issue, then we'll look at this schedule and we'll price out these services. So we simply wanted to resolve that first. And We're making Ed Diaz responsible for that.
Peabody has tried to be as clear as possible about the amount we feel we can spend for pro rata, for oversight, and for services, and shared that amount with the district, and we're very hopeful that we'll come to an agreement. Does that answer your question, Dr. Moore?
That's, okay. Ms. Malakoff?
I'm sorry, the other area that you mentioned that hadn't been resolved was the special ed.
A couple of special education issues that our special education attorney alerted us to. I don't think they're big issues. Joanne, do you want to address those? Well, we talked about them earlier today.
They're really more issues of the language itself rather than any substantive disputes or disagreements we may have with the language. Just seeking some more clarification.
You will see in this agreement that that we carry the bulk of the responsibility in providing special education instruction, but the school has to share in that responsibility and not get us into trouble. So we have to be clear about that.
Go ahead, Ms. Mel.
Got a bunch of questions. First of all, for Mr. Minnie, are you in this case representing the district or representing the charter?
Oh, that's very good.
Good
Thank
question,
you.
yeah. No,
Thank
I'm
you.
representing the district. I apologize, and I should have started
Yes.
that explanation. I've been representing the district back, since Deborah Flores was here a number of years ago. And what we did when the charter school, when Pat Morales first asked whether we could consult with them about what would independence be and what would they need, because we helped convert Palisades, Helix, Santiago, and Orange. There were a number of conversion schools that we've helped work with, both on behalf of the charter school and the school districts over the years. So I talked to the superintendent, and we talked about how that relationship would work. And we made clear to the charter school that while I'll facilitate and outline the legal requirements for doing this, my representation is to the district.
So who paid you to do
The school.
the school
Yeah.
district? Okay. Okay. Okay, my next questions are about the size of the school. Is there anything in here that says anything about how
Yes.
many students?
The capacity is 750.
And does it say anything about class size or how that would be distributed?
No, other than we obviously will apply for the class size reduction. But I assume that may be part of the contractual agreements we enter into with the employees, just as it is here.
Okay. I used to be on the board of the Hope District, and a problem for a period of time, they limited transfers, and the huge problem for them was figuring out who actually lived in the district. People were giving false addresses and so forth. And principals didn't want to act as policemen. How do you propose to figure out who's in your area once you're limiting out of your area students?
Well, as of now, we actually do home visits on all kindergarten students, and we do home visits on all sixth grade students, and we are discussing doing home visits on every student during the summer. That's one way, in addition to the documentation that we ask for, which has to, we don't just take a person's word for the fact that they live at a certain place. Now, we understand that there are ways to get around that, but if they're living with someone else, the agreement has to be notarized. So I think we try very hard. In the end, I'm sure some will slip through, but it's a pretty big attendance area too.
And when you say we do home visits, is it
The
teacher
teachers.
does it?
Sorry.
Okay. Let's see. Maybe this is a question from Mr. Minnie about, you said that there's a continuum from independence to not so independent. And our charter school, our Santa Barbara Charter and Cesar Chavez, you said, were at sort of one end. Where does this move the Peabody School? Does it move it further over or in the same place as the other two schools?
I didn't bring the other documents with me to compare, but I think that because those other charter schools are still purchasing a lot of the centralized services, Peabody's probably moving a marginal step farther to the independent end.
Now, those other charter schools do hire their own employees. They have their own salary schedules. They have their own employee agreements. But they do purchase more services from us. They're not direct
Oh, and
funded.
they're
That's
indirect
right.
funded, okay. So.
Are they nonprofits?
I can't recall off the top of my head.
Oh,
But this-
gosh,
but
yes,
this
they
charter
are.
is-
Cesar Chavez certainly is.
Yes, okay.
But you're proposing to be a nonprofit as
We
well?
will.
Yeah.
Is there some reason why, I'm just curious why you decided to fall where you do? I mean, why are they, I guess I don't quite understand is there advantages or disadvantages to where?
I think it's the autonomy will provide greater freedom of decision-making and at the same time greater accountability. And from the first moment I was interviewed at the school, I could tell that's what the teachers and the parents want, is they want to take fuller responsibility for the school's actions and for its achievements.
I think from a purely legal perspective too, thinking on behalf of the district, the hybrid arrangement left you somewhat exposed, I'll be honest, in the sense that you had liability where you didn't have control. So now this is far more clear where you have responsibility for oversight and they have the liability and so.
There were also some issues where we pushed the school, just as an example, payroll. Well, we could do payroll, but if they're not our personnel policies, that could have an effect on payroll. We didn't want to have to be interpreting the policies and then have us responsible for payroll and get it wrong. So we asked the school to take that responsibility.
Okay. Couple more questions. Credentialing, the teachers would still be credentialed. Was that correct?
Absolutely.
And you said that you would decide on your own calendar. Is that?
Well, we have the right to. Now, we may decide as a staff and the board of directors to stay with the current calendar and the current day, time,
Number of days?
schedule, number
Is-
of days.
Is that something that's a variable?
Well, the school already commits itself to 45 minutes daily past the ed code requirements. So technically, I think it could happen in any kind of configuration. The likelihood is that our calendar will be very close to Santa Barbara Elementary School districts for obvious reasons.
Okay. Is there any obligation for a charter to have the same mix of students as the district as a whole?
That's a good question. The Charter Schools Act says that one of the elements of the charter must specify how the school will seek to, I don't have the language here right in front of me, essentially mirror the demographics of the district, I think, the jurisdiction in which they're approved. It's some general. Pre-Prop 209, however. And so the way this section's been interpreted now is saying that the charter school obviously has to be facially neutral in its application, its admissions processes and that sort of thing, and can't have anything in by way of admission or preference that might create a disparate impact. It's supposed to do broad-based marketing, but of course with a conversion school, it's supposed to primarily focus on its attendance area, which may not match the demographics of the district as a whole. So it's one of those areas with a charter where you're supposed to state, and I'm sure we do, that you'll do marketing and outreach and multilingual publications and that sort of thing, but it's nothing we can actually address affirmatively, other than maybe adjusting your marketing if you decide that something's happening where you're out of balance. And we certainly can't do gender balancing, so.
Well, I'm just wondering, I really don't know if this is true, whether people of certain minorities perhaps within the conversion area may be going outside of the school. Is there not some transfers outside of Peabody to other schools? Do you remember that?
You mean Peabody attendance,
There.
former attendance area?
Going to
Peabody-
other schools.
Yes, I mean, there's give and take within the district's
So
schools.
it is possible that racially or ethnically they may be different going out than students coming in, which may cause a difference. And I'm curious as to whether that couldn't be something, I don't know, whether it's something else to just discuss.
It's something to watch, and the charter school should be watching for it as well to make sure their own policies and practices are not leading to a disparate impact against a protected group. And it is, I have heard that this is really, stereotyping, but certain races are less likely to warm up to charter schools as an alternative program than others. I've heard that now stated a couple times, as if there's studies about that. So, but no fault of the charter school, is just because it's considered an alternative program.
Can I follow up with Mrs. Malikoff's question? I have an image of the attendance area, and that it's kind of gerrymandered with a finger that runs down parallel to the freeway on the east side of the freeway.
Right.
My
Down
recollections
Delavina
are
Street.
the Peabody. Is there busing from that area?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Is there busing from outside the attendance area?
No.
Okay. So would that continue?
Yes.
Okay. But it's all but it won't come into conflict with these priorities we were discussing earlier. It's all within the attendance area.
Within the attendance area.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a couple of questions. I think most of the bases have been covered. With regard to the capacity of the school, the 750, I don't know if you or staff can answer the question of how was that capacity arrived at? I know that we've done, through our facilities master plan, we've arrived at loading capacities, but how was the Peabody capacity, other than Peabody saying, yeah, we'll take 750 students?
We all probably have different ideas about that. I believe it was arrived at by the fact that they already have 743 students, and they don't have any room for more.
But are you asking about
Yes.
how historically it
Well,
just got larger and larger, and
historically
now
it got larger
there's
and
no
larger,
room for
and
any
I
other
ass-
classrooms?
Yeah, thank you, okay, but historically it got larger and larger, and it was, I assumed, because of transfers in from outside of your traditional attendance boundary, and I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. How many students would you have if you just had students from your attendance boundary, and then how many more students would you have room for? So I'm just curious how the,
If you take the number of outside transfers from outside the attendance boundary out of the 743, am I
Right.
right? Then
be
you have
600 and-
500 students.
okay, okay.
Well,
Maybe
what,
550 or
500,
so.
530?
Yep.
530 students.
I guess it gets, I mean, I'm certainly not faulting you for, taking as many students as, there's a high demand for Peabody, but I guess I get back to the admissions policies and procedures, and I really have trouble with this priority list. Because as I read the priority list, it says current and returning charter school students, and then it's siblings of currently enrolled in-district charter school students. So in-district means within the Santa Barbara school districts. But those current and returning charter school students, assuming they did not have siblings, could be from outside of our district.
Certainly.
And they would get priority over an in-district student. And I find that really troubling. Now, I realize that practically speaking, that what happens is that it achieves the goal of, providing priority to neighborhood students. But when you read through that priority list, that's not what it says to a layperson. So I would really like to try and find a way to justify that.
I take that as board direction, since I watched the heads nod and heard other comments to that effect, for us to revisit this with the school. So we will plan to do that.
Okay, and then I just have a couple of other, you answered the question about the Exploration Center. I had highlighted that, and I asked about the loading capacity. And this is a more general question having nothing to do with Peabody School. I don't want anybody to think I'm talking about Peabody or any other charter school. But when you talk about facilities, and, I've had the pleasure, I'll say, of looking at several MOUs, at least within our district, and charters, there's nothing that addresses really maintenance of the facilities. I know that very often charters can come up with various kinds of contracting relationships so that they can cut costs for, maintenance, custodian work, that sort of thing. Is there any kind of minimum requirement, other than a physical inspection by a district, to maintain the facilities to a certain level? At least the minimum level that the district maintains their own facilities?
That, I believe if you look at page 4 of 9, section 9, this language in section 9 under maintenance pretty much follows the regulatory language. And what it does is it breaks down the facilities maintenance and the furnishings and equipment maintenance responsibility between effectively minor and major maintenance or deferred maintenance. The charter school is responsible for doing, page 4 of 9 on the facilities use
This is
agreement.
the facilities
Sorry.
use agreement. It is the last MOU.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, got it.
And it makes the charter school responsible for the daily maintenance, the minor maintenance of the furnishings and equipment in the facility to the same level the district's policies or practices. So it's, yeah.
And I thought I had read these documents carefully, but
No, I
clearly
just-
not carefully
And
enough.
the deferred maintenance is then the district's responsibility.
But
So-
you are right, it relies on visual inspection
Yeah, yeah.
on the part of the district, and if we don't go out and inspect, then
Certainly no worries about Peabody. I just don't want anybody to think I'm talking about that campus, because I'm not. It was just curiosity. Thank you. Any other questions? Clearly, this was a first go-around in front of the board, and it reflects a lot of hard work on the part of the school and the parents and the principal, teachers, and we appreciate that. So I hope that it's all in the spirit of trying to put together a great agreement, that you accept the comments from the board this evening. And we will be back at this for action, I hope,
I
very
appreciate
soon.
that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
And thank you to the parents for coming, and there's some staff members here. Thank you for coming. And thanks, Mr. Minnie and Nancy Dow. We appreciate it. Any other final comments? Mr. Minnie, Ms. Ford, okay, staff members? Okay,
no, we'll be returning this to you probably at the March 13 meeting with recommendation for action.
okay. Now we have a follow-up report on basic aid.
Well, the board heard a report on basic aid, and in fact, Kate, before you leave, this does have some bearing on charter schools. Oh, okay. So we invited Mr. Minnie to this as well, and invited the charter school to listen to this presentation as well. We believe some of the information that was provided to the board earlier was not up to date. The different assumptions were used. We have verified a lot of the information through school services and other sources. Mr. Minnie is a primary source of a lot of the information that you'll hear tonight, and we'll be asking him to address some of those issues as well. So this is Grand Slam night for Paul Minnie. Giving our presentation is Bob Wolf.
Well, actually, I was going to defer to Mr. Gonzalez since the hired charter school gun is here. I just figured that he did such a good job.
Yes.
Yeah, there's a number of issues that came up about basic aid that were done. I've gotten the impression that some of you may feel that basic aid is the solution to our financial solvency, and it's not, so let's go on. I decided I'd start this a little bit.
End of report.
End of report. To try to get on a level playing field with school finances, I'm not certain everybody's understanding of the language of the school business side of it, so I just thought we'd do it real quick. Basically, your general fund unrestricted revenue limit is known as the revenue limit. It also is called the base revenue limit, which is that per dollar amount per ADA that the state sets for you. So when we calculate that, we calculate the state base revenue limit times the ADA. Now, this ADA excludes any charter school ADA. Now, at a later time, we're going to talk about a calculation where the two ADAs are combined, and I'll get to that. This revenue limit calculation can be reduced if the state has a deficit. Again, components of the revenue limit are the property tax, state aid, This is what your 2006, 2007 adopted budget looks like. You'll see that other local revenues or some of the monies that are local donations or things like that, categorical funds from the state, categorical funds from the federal, and here's your revenue limit calculation.
This is
As
our
you-
elementary district.
This is for just the elementary school district, yeah. Every comment I'm going to be making tonight or discussion is about just the elementary school district. So of this 67%, this is what it looks like. Now, you're going to think I'm colorblind because all these things are in green. That's your property tax portion of this breakdown. It also, because of other conversations that I've had with people, I decided to show the other things that are within the revenue limit calculation. Meals for Needy. Meals for Needy is a calculation within the revenue limit calculation that gives the district extra money that comes in the form of state aid. I guess technically speaking, that belongs to the cafeteria fund. We've never transferred that to the cafeteria fund. Here's BITSA, which is the beginning teacher. Here's hourly programs. Unemployment insurance, there's a set rate, or the amount of money that the school district paid in 1978, I believe it is. Anything over and above that, the difference we get back in the form of state aid. We lose revenue limit to the deficit factor. Last year there was a deficit factor, and this is the 506 now. So there was a deficit factor last year. That constitutes a loss of money to the district. Transfers to the county for SDC classes. That's a loss of money to the school district. Although it's really sort of a break even because we take their ADA, count it, and then we give them back the money that's for that. The loss of revenue of PERS, reduction. For every classified worker that gets paid, there's a maximum of 13.02%. Some of that money the district pays, like this year we're paying 9.1% of actual cash. The difference between the 13.02 and that 9.1, which is about 3.8 something, is lost revenue. The state takes that back and doesn't give us that revenue in this calculation. And then the in-transfer to the charter schools. Now the state backfills that in or gives us the money for that as long as you're not a basic aid district. Okay, so here's the calculation. And in this, I'm just putting this up here because in the next slide we're going to talk about the ed coach, as you can see. This year the elementary school district has this much money for their ADA. Charter school, in the charter school block funding grant, here's the breakdown. And you'll see that in charter schools, because they're not favored in the state, they have a differentiated rate by grade level. So the state recognizes that it's more expensive to fund school programs for 4th to 6th graders, and so they give more money to that. Now, as you can see in this later, you can see that we don't meet that standard right now. So when we give money to the state, or we give money to the charter schools, we're based on a property tax per ADA calculation, which takes into account our ADA plus the charter school's ADA, which doesn't meet this number, okay? And I'm going to show you that calculation in a second. If this number was higher than any of these, like if we're talking about the high school district ADA would fall right in this area right here. And so we would be fully funding these grades at the high school level in that calculation. Oh, sorry. Okay, so here's the calculation of the base revenue limit, just as you can see, it excludes the charter school. That's our revenue limit. Please keep in mind that for $23 million fund. Okay, now I'm David Copperfield. I poofed all of the ADA, all of the charter schools that are currently in the district are now gone. Okay, the only thing that we have as a charter school is this ADA number right here. District. Here's the 23.5, which is the calculation that you just saw for basic revenue limit. And here's the actual amount. This total amount is the total property tax that we're receiving this year, about $25 million. So if all the charter schools were gone and all the charter school ADA was gone, we'd have about $1.6 million over the base revenue limit calculation, which would make us a basic aid district. That's not the case, and so that's the way it works out. So here's the ed code section that tells us how we have to fund the charter schools. And we use the lesser, annually, it's the lesser of the two following amounts. This is the block school amount, which I showed you those block school rates. This is basically the basic aid way. If you were a basic aid district and you're funding charter schools, this is basically the calculation you do, because that would be the lesser amount, because this is the property tax. This is what I said, the average property taxes per unit of ADA. Let's see. This is just shows you, I forget what this slide shows you, I'm sorry. Probably shows you the same thing. It's this current year. It's the current year, and it shows you this slice of this revenue limit calculation of how much of it goes out to the charter schools, and this is any of the encroachment or the overfunding. So here's the way we calculate it. Here's the district property tax that has been given to us on the J1 report, or the P1 report of the J29 by the county assessor's office. Here's our ADA from last year. Here's the charter school's ADA from last year for the elementary school district. And so you add these two together, divide it into that, and you come out with this total. This total is less than the total that's on the charter block grant, so this is what we fund. The difference between this number and the charter school block grant is the state aid that the state gives to the charter schools, much similar to our revenue limit calculation. So what's the likely timeline? I really don't know. And I don't know because there's so many factors that are involved with trying to get to basic aid. My best guess is here. This chart is the chart that you originally saw that's been updated slightly in that I've increased this and I've increased this. All of the colored columns here are all of the different factors that sort of mesh together to decide whether you're a basic aid district. Right now on this calculation that you saw back in June, I believe, it was 2012, 2013 when we would be upside down. We would just miss it in 2011, 2012, but we would be upside down. So then there's a number of other questions about factors. So here I made an assumption that the property tax would continue to grow at 6.65%, which was the difference between these 2 years. And then the in lieu of transfers to the charter school would grow at 2.7. Where would you be? Well, you move from 2012, 2013 to 2009, 2010. Now, these two columns haven't changed from that previous graph because that's the base graph, but these two columns have. And so you can see as you moved up. Okay.
Wait, Mr. Wolf, could I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
jump in there? The in lieu of transfers grow at 2.7%. What was your?
I'll prove that in a second.
Okay.
Because that question has come up. Could we accelerate the timeline by stopping new transfers into the elementary school district? Here's the chart that I have, the current chart of the transfers in from the various districts. 328, as you can see, for enrollment. And the first chart I got, I think, was 354, and that's why I use that number. So here, poof, we're going to return all of the inter-district transfers, and I said approximately 347 ADA, and that was based on the 354 number that somehow or another was stuck into my head. So now what happens is you also, again, move up. You move up to 2009, 2010, but you're just barely at a basic aid level. That's not even enough to fund the reserve that you would have to be a basic aid district, but that takes into account all of those things. Now, the question has become, let's see, this looks at taking and figuring out, actually computing the actual transfer of ADA, counting these two ADA figures. I left the charter school ADA the same. I reduced the number of district charter, or the district ADA, and I increased the property tax levels. Here's the property tax level per calculation per. So as you can see, even if the charter school ADA stays the same and the property tax level goes up and we go down, you're going to have an increase of funding going to the charter school based on the in lieu of property tax, which is sort of why I came up with 2.7, the calculation. So this takes that figure that I just showed you and puts that into this column, which is a lot more than 2.7%. And you can see that all of a sudden we're back to 2012, 2013 with those assumptions. That the charter school ADA stayed the same, that our ADA dropped, that the base revenue limits basically stayed the same. The only thing that changed was this amount out here to the charter schools. And so now we're right back down to 2012, 2013. Now, I've talked to the county assessor's office that's responsible for property taxes. They don't even try to estimate or guess what the property tax is going to be for the following year. They just sort of let it happen to them. And that's because when you sell property, obviously the assessed value is the current property sale price. So there's no way that they try to estimate how many housing sales are going to have or what those prices are going to be, which is why I was sort of left on my own when I did this calculation. The flow of funding, these are questions that were asked. Flow of funding to the basic aid charter school district and to a revenue limit district. There is no really flow of funding from any of the districts to one another. This is the education code section. Talks about for a charter school pupil, sponsored by a basic aid district who resides in basically a non-revenue limit district. The SPA, which is the Superintendent of Public Instruction, is going to give 70% of the revenue limit equal to the daily attendance. Now, what's that look like? This is all nice and good. I love reading Ed Code law, especially late at night. I tried to do this. Here's Goleta. They're a basic aid district. I made up a charter school. Goleta does not have a charter school. This is just a made-up figure. Pupil is John Doe, and he lives in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara's base revenue limit is this. 70% of that is $3,700. That's what the state would give to Goleta for this student because they don't get any other state aid. You have to remember the real definition of a basic aid district is a district that receives no state apportionment. And property tax is not a state apportionment. It's a local tax. So this is another code section, and otherwise loses a basic aid status. If you were a basic aid...
Excuse me, going back one.
Yes, ma'am.
Is that Santa Barbara is as a revenue limit, not
Yes.
as a basic aid?
Yes, this would be, this applies to this ed code section. Okay, and so we're the other than basic aid. I love the way they say that. Other than basic aid, it means revenue limit district. So that's it. So now what you have is if you were a basic aid district and you lost your status, and we're not in that position because we're not a basic aid status district, there would be a calculation that would come down where they would take the property tax in excess of the revenue limit guarantee and divide it by the property tax, and that would give you money back to your district that's a basic aid district because you quote-unquote lost your status. Now this calculation's a little bit off because I'm not really certain, and the state hasn't gotten back to me. But you can see here that we took the excess, which is this $1.6 million that you saw before. This is the property tax transfer out to the basic aid or to the charter schools that we're doing. So you come up with the proration factor. I then used these ADA figures for the charter schools at their rate, at the block grant rate, and came up with a number that comes out. Now the number that they're returning to us is more than the number that we originally had, which I don't think is an accurate assessment. So I'm probably wrong down here someplace, but this sort of gives you a feel for, in a numbers section, of what that looks like. Here's the most interesting one. That's because they've sort of changed the name of sponsoring school districts. Normally when you hear sponsoring school districts in reference to charter schools, they mean you, the agency that did that. In the case of a basic aid district, it's the district of residence. And so if you have a student that's a resident of, say, Goleta, because they're a basic aid district, just to use them as an example, in the next ed code section slide I'll show, the sponsoring school district becomes that basic aid district as opposed to the one that actually approved the charter school. So here we come. Now section A is that section that I showed you where it talked about the property tax or the charter school the district gives in lieu of property tax transfer. That's the section A. Paragraphs 1 through 4 of that subdivision just talk about when we give the monies and the percentage of monies that have to go out to them. Well, what this says is it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply for pupils who reside in or are eligible to attend in a basic aid district. So if you have a basic aid resident student, I don't give them property tax transfers the way I read this. And I'm also trying to get a read back from the state on that because this is the way I do this. With regard to these students, the sponsoring district basic aid shall transfer to the charter school an amount of funds equivalent to the revenue limit earned, blah, blah, blah. Basically, they give them the block grant amount up to their property tax per ADA. So if the charter school's property tax per ADA is $6,300 and they're running the 912 program, they don't give them $6,400. They only give them $6,300, whatever that property tax rate is. The most interesting thing about this is in the ed code section, is that at the request of the charter school, it doesn't come to the district. It's the charter district school's responsibility to go to the basic aid and bill them for the money. The way this way that I read this and interpret this. And Mr. Minnie's going to beat me up because he's the lawyer, but and I've read this about 10 times to try to come up with this interpretation, which is also why I asked the state, because I just couldn't believe that this was the case. Because now what we're going to have to do, if my interpretation of this is correct, for all of those interdistrict transfers to our charter schools, we're going to have to look and see which one of those ones are from either Montecito or Goleta or any of the other basic aid districts in the county, and then we're going to have to take them out of our calculation in the charter school. If they want money for those kids, they're going to have to go to those basic aid districts to get that. So how is a county-wide charter school funded? Basically, this is from, I think, from your office, Mr. Simmons, or Miss Simmons? I don't know. This is what, it was in an email from him. The countywide basic countywide charter school is entirely funded with state aid. So we don't give up any property tax for a countywide charter school. But if you're a basic aid district, you pay the full freight. Because, and so when Ms. Kwong, I think it was the lawyer that was here, that talked about the charter school becomes a basic aid charter district. When the district becomes a charter school, that's because you're receiving no longer state apportionment funding, you're fully funding the charter school. And so in essence, when she said it, I didn't really believe it, but as I looked and researched this, that's the case in point. Because your district is a basic aid district and not receiving any state apportionment whatsoever, if you authorize a charter school, or even in the case of a countywide charter school, you're now fully funding your portion of that. So if you have 10 students going to the countywide charter school, you're going to fund those 10 students, and the state bills you for that money. What is the impact? And this is, now we're out of the charter school and the basic aid. This was a question for 6th graders. I've talked to Michelle Huntunik at School Services of California a number of times. So what can you do? You can move them. You want to put the 6th graders in La Cumbre? Go ahead and do that. That's not a problem. But they'll only receive the elementary base revenue limit. The biggest problem that they had with this scenario was who's going to supervise that 6th grade teacher at La Cumbre School, because it's an elementary school child now at a junior high school. So who's going to look at that? And I don't think we have a problem with that. There's going to obviously a principal there that's going to do that, but they couldn't get past that point of what to do. What could you do? I don't know what you could do. We could go in and do a possible action of change of CDS code, but anybody in Sacramento is going to look at us trying to put a middle school in the high school district for 5th graders or 6th graders that we've been getting elementary school funding for, that we think we're going to get high school funding for. That's not going to fly. We're not going to get more money for those kids. If we happen to get more money for those kids, because you've taken action to reorganize the districts, and you've gone through the reorganization process, and now you've got a 612 high school district instead of a 712 high school district, you may get more funding for that, but I don't know that would fly very well. So the attempt to transfer the enrollment and transfer those kids' responsibility to the high school district to encourage or quicken the movement toward basic aid, I don't think we can do that. It essentially that's the way that works. And do you have any questions?
Nor did we do that when we did have La Cumbre Middle
Right.
School. Those 6th grade students were still in the elementary district.
Any questions?
Yes?
Go ahead.
I guess my first question is on your charts, the various ones of estimate of when the elementary school district might achieve basic aid status. First question is your estimated P2 ADA. You have the 05, 06 numbers. And then for 06, 07, and 07, 08, for 06, 07, you actually show the numbers going up for this year. Is the ADA going to be higher for P2 this year?
It actually could possibly be higher because of the attempts of the elementary school district, or the effort of the elementary school district administrators to raise their ADA level.
And then on some of the charts, it's actually going up for 07, 08 as well.
And that was based on the calculation it's when you try to guess what your number is going to be in April, you try to use a number of factors to compare things back to either your CBEDS enrollment or the P1, P2 numbers from prior years, and try to get a percentage of that. Based on those percentages and the way that was calculated, that's where they came out.
Okay, but
it would be nice to have the ADA increase. Because even though your enrollment doesn't increase, I mean, if you're running, we've been running a 94.5%, 95% absence or attendance rate. So there's those 5% of kids. So even if you are still losing enrollment, you can still increase your ADA count, which is the number of kids in seat, if in fact you go out, beat the bushes, and get those kids back into school.
Okay, absolutely. No, that obviously, as a revenue limit district, that's great, but in terms of trying to figure out if you're going to become basic aid, then it'd be nice to.
Welcome to my world.
Yes, I know. And I guess just that one of the comments I want to make is that, is looking at Hope in particular, because they're a district where, and I don't know, maybe Dr. Sarvis, you know now, do they estimate basic aid for 0708 or is it 0809?
0809,
For 0809.
as does Carpinteria.
And so they took a proactive stance in terms of let's do what we can to go ahead and reduce our enrollment numbers and see where that gets us. But they seemed to, I don't know, they seem to be a little bit more sure. And I suppose it's the charters add just an extra little dollop of fun in terms of trying to figure things out accurately. But I just think that that's something that the board needs to look at.
Go ahead.
I just had a couple of, I think, quick questions, and that is, why is it that the estimates vary from
3 to 6 years.
I'm sorry, from one, unless I'm looking at this wrong, from one chart to another?
Because I changed the variables in the chart. Each one of those, the base chart, the verse chart, is essentially the base chart that I did way back in June. And then I took the same exact figures and then tried to change the variables in one or more of those columns to try to answer your questions, to show you why it's almost impossible to try to predict exactly when you're going to go to basic aid status.
Okay, so the variables would, I'm looking for, the variables would be in the, I'm looking at the P2 column.
Okay?
The variables would be there.
That in
Okay.
fact is one of the columns. If you all of a sudden lost 1,000 kids in the elementary school district through no action of yours whatsoever, they just didn't come to school.
Okay.
Yeah, you would probably get there a lot faster than you would if you do the piecemeal where you lose 100 kids a year, plus some of them going to charter school, plus aging out and things like that. So all of those factors are involved.
Okay, and then the other question I had was, why is basic aid not a panacea? I mean, I understand that it isn't a panacea. I mean, nothing is, but why is basic aid? Why would you not benefit from basic aid?
Oh, I didn't say that I didn't mean to give the impression that you wouldn't benefit from basic aid. As you could see on some of those charts, you make basic aid by $157,000. That's not going to help you out. If you make it by 1.5 or 1.6 or 2.4, yeah, you're obviously in a much better position than you would be. The problem with it is you no longer have sort of a safety net of state aid for the fluctuations in attendance. So you need to increase the state sets the minimum balance, reserve balance of 3% for districts our size. You have to go up to almost 10 or 12 or 13% and put that in reserve if you're a basic aid district, because the state's not going to come in and bail you out. Once you're a basic aid, you're on your own essentially in this state. And so fluctuations in property taxes, problems that happen, there's not really any place to go to the state or any place else. You basically have to go out on your own, and so you're more operating as an independent enterprise on your own. And so if you want to go out and do a loan from somebody, they're going to be looking at your ending fund balance, and 3%, I'll tell you, it's not going to cut it for anybody to loan you money. So there's advantages to being a basic aid district, but there's also the downside or the dark side of the force, where you're sort of out on your own, swinging in the wind, so to speak, where you have to make sure that your financial statements are really better than they would be if you were a revenue limit district.
So that would apply to mostly to districts that basically just barely make basic aid
That's
status.
correct. Yeah, if you're right on the cusp, if you're right there, and I would say even within $1.1 million is sort of right on the cusp, because that's
Okay.
I mean, if $5,000 or $6,000 per kid, you're talking about maybe 200 kids can make a difference to you. So yeah, once you get there and you're in deep into it, yeah, you're looking for ways to discourage children from enrolling in school, obviously. And but as far as inter-district people coming in, you really want to look at your inter-district people. Obviously, the in-district people and the people that are in your attendance area, you're going to service them because that's your base and that's your stakeholders. But you're not really interested in having people come in from Lompoc or Ventura or Oxnard or other districts.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I think Dr. Sarvis wants to ask Mr. Mooney a couple of
Well,
questions.
there were a couple of graphs, one where you were questioning the state amount, the other where you were questioning the language, and I was hoping that Paul could be able to weigh in on those.
Thanks. I got to give him a round of applause. I don't think I've ever had anybody explain basic aid and revenue limit financing in 10 minutes like you just did in those slides. I know I've been up since 5, so some of them went way over my head. There were a couple slides, and it was towards the end here, Bob. There was one where you said you were struggling with it. You had highlighted in red. Is that one right there, number 28, I think it was? No, next one. We do know, for example. Yeah, this was added by SB 955, I think, and I think the department has said they never applied this section. And it was intended to prevent, if you've read about Sequoia Union High School District up in Northern California, had charters coming to it. They're basic aid. They're surrounded by basic aid districts, but they've got some elementary revenue limit districts. And they said, look, why don't you go get your charter from the revenue limit district? And we don't care if our kids go there. In fact, that'd be fine, but that way we don't have to deal with the basic aid financing issue. And so the Department of Finance tried to put this bill in place, and if you read it carefully, and you don't really want to, but I'm confident that it was defective from the first point, and so the Department of Ed said we can't implement this bill. I mean, bottom line for districts, and this is the way my rudimentary understanding is, when you're basic aid, when you've reached that golden threshold, and you've got a charter school, which pierces your boundaries, and can allow kids to come in from other districts. If they come in from another basic aid district, you're in bad shape. You're gonna pay 100% of that because you're not even gonna get the 70% reimbursement. So you might think about, based upon the fact that you just told me that Hope, Carpentry, and some of the other districts might become basic aid, doing what Sequoia did up in the South Bay.
That means all 5 will be basic aid districts that surround us.
Right, and Sequoia High School District went to the other unifieds and high school districts around it in the South Bay that are also basic aid and said, look, let's have an agreement. We're all going to have charters, and they do, a lot of them do. If we get if you got a charter and you get one of our kids, we're going to transfer to you, and I don't know what the exact amount is, but it's a cost sharing agreement.
They don't have any charters.
What's that?
None of the basic aid.
They don't now. They may.
They go to the revenue limit.
Oh, they go to the revenue limit district. Yeah. So that's one solution, one possibility. May not help. Yeah. But until you get there, if you're taking all of the children from inside the district into the charter, that again, my understanding is you're not affecting the basic aid equation.
I guess, yeah, I'd like to have you answer also in a fairly direct manner. So once the district is basic aid, the charter funding is still based on the state formula for charter funding.
Right. Block grant.
So the district becomes richer. The charter school stays at the same level.
Right.
We had discussed earlier the possible advantage to a charter school to de-charter so that it could share in that wealth of the rest of the district.
Interesting idea. I was up in Sausalito last
Yes.
week where the district has 238 students. Their basic aid, they get $26,000 a student. The charter school gets the block grant funding at whatever the numbers were you had up there, $5,600, and the district has graciously agreed to give $900 a student to the charter school on top of the $5,500 a student. And there was some debate about whether or not that was equitable and whether they should drop their charter, but you could. You could, because then the students would come back into the district and Sausalito would make a difference. If you were teetering at basic aid, it might affect your numbers. But yeah, but no, the charter school always gets the block grant funding and has no entitlement to the basic aid funding.
Good. And that's contrary to what the board heard before from Ms. Kwong. Okay. The statement was that the charter school essentially becomes a basic aid school as well. And I wanted to establish that funding is the same funding and doesn't change for the charter school.
Well, Does the enrollment that goes to the charter school then help the district become basic aid?
No.
No.
It shouldn't, again, Bob went through it in much greater detail. My rudimentary understanding is that until you become basic aid, you're getting, I thought, 100% backfill from the state. So you're transferring to the charter school the block grant funding amount out of your in lieu of transfer. You're making in lieu of transfer throughout the year. You're actually having to front money to the charter school before you actually get it in December and February, whenever you get your property tax receipts. But to the extent that you pay out, $5,600 a student to the charter school and only get $4,400 or whatever from the property taxes, you're supposed to get the difference back from the state until you hit that magic block grant funding. That basic aid mark, where then they start looking at where the kids actually came from, within your district, out of district, in basic aid or revenue limit district.
I'd really like to wrap up. Can we?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead.
Just a quick question about the forecasting. You were saying that you were basically guesstimating and that the county doesn't actually provide any figures. But I'm just wondering if there are other agencies that rely on knowing what future property tax amounts are going to be for their budget. Are there any other resources that we could turn to look for
not that I'm aware of. I mean, property taxes are obviously given to all of the local agencies, the city and the state, but the county is the one that makes the distribution based on a schedule called a teeter schedule.
Go to the city and say, what projections do you use so that
I could try to do that. I didn't use that option because I've been used to dealing with the county.
Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Thanks, Mr. Minnie, for weighing in on those couple of critical issues.
I guess I wanted to, and maybe I think they don't need to come back to answer this, I don't know. I've been concerned though, as you go through the transition of declining enrollment to get to basic aid, things get worse before you get better because you're losing revenue. Now, for the elementary district, we're already in dire straits. Did you do some kind of crossing curves, some analysis that shows what happens as we decline before basic aid kicks in?
Dr. Noel, when the superintendent and I first discussed this, we were sitting there at the table trying to quantify a little graph that would simply show the enrollment and the dollars and where would they cross. We weren't successful in creating that, and that was one of the things specifically requested of Ms. Kwong when she was here, and she wasn't able to do that. I don't know that it is possible to create that formula, but you hit the nail right on the head. And to follow up on what Bob's opening statement was, not a panacea, I think, my opinion, I share it with Mr. Wolf, I've shared it with the board. I think the concern I had was accelerating basic aid, taking these steps to accelerate to that status, fooling around with your enrollment, your transfers, all of these things. You mentioned getting kids out of school versus getting kids into school. My position has been, let basic aid happen. It will happen in its own natural progression. I'm not so sure that it's prudent for the district to accelerate to achieve basic aid status by a year or two, along the way compromising the transfer policy, the enrollment. Do we want kids in? Do we want kids out? It kind of takes you away from your core mission as a revenue limit district. And yeah, you're right. Things will get worse before they get better. And then once you become basic aid, Mr. Wolf was correct. The state requires a 12% to 15% reserve, and you lose what I call the P2 safety net, where the state comes in and makes you whole based on your highest enrollment. So there are a lot of things to consider.
Does that happen immediately? I mean, when does this big reserve?
No, that's been in effect. That's been part of.
But as you move from revenue limit to basic aid.
Yeah, once you became basic aid, you'd have to have that reserve.
At one point, all of a sudden, one year you have a 3% reserve, and the next year it's.
Yep.
And that's a legal requirement?
Yes, sir. So, because you have to be prepared to make a whole year without any state aid till you change back to a revenue limit district.
Thanks, Mr. Diaz. I'm hoping that we have time for Ms. Sawaski to make her report on systematic English language development program.
As you know, our English language development program, particularly in the elementary district, is of particular concern to us. We've spent considerable time and energy this year in training. Almost every teacher in the elementary district has been part of this effort. Certainly our administrators, and Robin Sawaski has taken on this cause.
The lead, yeah. Well, yes, Dr. Sarvis kind of explained it. It's been a major focus, and I promise to come back to the board on a regular basis and share not only how our English learners are doing in our performance in their assessment, but how the program itself and our initiative with the professional development is going. So I'll make this quick. There's no numbers, I don't think, on here, so we'll go. I wanted to remind you that, and I know you know this because we've done a lot of talking about what English language development actually is, and the program requirements from the California Department of Education say that English language development must have instruction in English at the student's appropriate level of English proficiency, and we use the CELT to show that. And, you know, we start with the beginning and move on up to advanced. And then also meaningful access to grade level academic content. So they are not left out of, English learners are not left out of our regular academic content. And there's some confusion about how the English language arts program and the English language development program are distinguished. And I want to make it very clear that our English learners have both of these. They are not left out of our core program. So the English language arts programs teach grade level content standards outlined in the California Reading Language Arts Framework. And we have a brand new one. In fact, those of us who got to go to the Asilomar Curriculum Instruction conference this last week picked up a new one, and I'm going to share a little bit about it. The new one is very similar to the one that the previous one, standards-based practice all the way. There are there's more emphasis on vocabulary, particularly academic vocabulary, writing, and the English learner needs. And then ELD programs, English language development programs, teach the English language at each student's level of English proficiency again. And I want to read just briefly, I won't take too long here, but I wanted to, I looked through the framework again today and looked at, there's a large section on English language development, and some of the key statements are that English learners participate in an instructional program that supports their acquisition of informal English, and that's where we do a lot of oral language development, and teaches them the patterns of formal academic English. So in order to reach the proficiency level of their peers that are English-only students, or English is their first language, and that academic rigor that they need to be able to be competitive and go on to college if they wish. Effective teachers use a variety of activities, and if you go to see the English language development classes in our schools, and I was hoping to get a video of this. I did ask at the high schools, but all the kids were too busy to get this done. But sometime I will bring a little video clip of some lessons because it's really fun to see. And you'll see all of what it says. Effective teachers use a variety of activities to introduce and reinforce language concepts. Examples: singing, presenting dramas, reading aloud, using visuals and props, and practicing simple phrases and vocabulary. One point over here I thought is particularly important. Students should receive specific constructive feedback from their teachers regarding the accuracy of their oral and written work and their progress toward mastery of conventional English. In the past, I think many teachers have been reticent to be as constructive, I guess, or to really give feedback that's specific about the oral language or the written language. And so students who are trying really hard and are making great progress go on and they get A's and they're just moving right along. And then when they get to college, they recognize the fact, and so do their teachers, that they're nowhere near the level that they need to be and be competitive. So it clearly states in our framework, which is our guide, that we have to be able to do this. So we're really trying to make that rigor be apparent in all of our lessons. And then the focused approach, which is the Susanna Dutro model of the instructional blueprint, has these 3 parts to the program. And I won't go through these again, but I just want to remind you that the systematic ELD instruction is that separate piece of content where students are learning about English. Also necessary is the front loading of the language to support the grade level content, and then again the comprehensible delivery of content. And that's your SDI, your specially designed academic instruction in English strategies that you see in regular grade level content. Here's where we've been. So in the spring of 2006, we started out with about 50 teacher leaders and administrators, and everybody participated in this systematic ELD training with Susanna Dutro. Then between August and December, approximately 200 teachers participated in the training. And that was last summer when Susanna came and gave the welcome back address. And it's over 200, but I wanted to put that, I didn't have the exact number in front of me. Then in October, the ELD teacher leaders worked with Susanna to select some support materials. That's Carousel of Ideas, which you've approved as far as our supplemental materials. And then in January, this was kind of the mandate. I told all the teachers in August, I don't make a lot of mandates, but this is my first formal mandate. We've all been trained now. Every school has access to materials. By January, and that was the limit date, the last date, all English learners will be having regular ELD instruction for 30 to 45 dedicated minutes, and that's happened in many schools long before the January deadline, but that's in place. Next week, on March 8th, Susanna will be here for 2 days, the 8th and the 9th. She's meeting with the principals. We're going over an observation tool. We're looking at assessments, and we're working with the teachers in the afternoon on Thursday. So we're getting constant support from her by email, but she's going to be here for 2 days to really help us and give us some constructive feedback. We're really looking, now we've got it all implemented in place, but now we're building toward the quality, which is really going to help our students even more. And then this summer, we're going to have some of our ELD teacher leaders participate in a Presenters Institute so that we're really building that capacity even more. I'm not as interested in having so many of those teachers be actual presenters. We'll need that when we have new teachers come on board, but I'm more interested in the fact that when you're a presenter, you really, internalize the material, and so that will that'll build the capacity in our district again, and I want to spread those out at the sites. And then, of course, beyond, we'll get ongoing training and coaching. The ELD teacher leader role is to build capacity and understanding at the site and the district level, to coach and support teachers at the sites. Now, these are not going to be teachers out of the classroom. They will be in the classroom, but they'll receive stipends and time to do demo lessons, help teachers with lessons, share best practices, work with grade levels, monitor the ELD implementation at their site and the district, and then to help with the assessment structure. And because they're at each site, it won't interfere with their instructional, responsibilities. As we kept with the implementation, here's some comments I just collected from ELD meetings, from going to the sites. Couple of the principals said kudos to the board and to the district for recognizing and supporting this real district-wide need, and that implementing is very slow. Here were some initial questions, maybe, some of us all shared in this. What is it? Why do we need it? Doesn't the reading program cover it? Which we were told in the beginning, yes, And then, of course, what materials and how will we fit it into the day? That has been the ongoing challenge. And it continues to be a challenge. I have the schedules from every one of the schools, and with Susanna, we're going to be going around as much as we can. And I will share those schedules with you as well, so that if you'd like to go at some time or join me, we can go do that. This was, I liked this one. Several teachers told me this, as well as administrators, that the systematic ELD program we have allows teachers to use creativity and professional judgment, because it wasn't a scripted program. And that was one of the reasons I read from here. You'll see a lot of singing, chanting, drama, the kinds of things that some teachers thought, were gone. Now, they don't have to be gone. I know you can find ways to incorporate that into our English language arts and reading program, but they're really finding it easy to do with ELD because of that oral language. We're really developing and pushing that. And then, of course, the time again, and that teachers are working together out of real necessity. The collaboration, it's really pushing that collaboration. And you'll find the last one, they're having lots of fun. When you watch them, in action, they've got smiles on their faces. The kids are laughing. The teachers are very motivated. And it's great to see. So I'm really happy with the progress. And I was going to, Dr. Sarvis kind of took some of the thunder away by doing in his, I didn't know in his superintendent's report he was going to talk about the categorical program monitoring team coming, but we were so excited after all the years with Comité and all of the, you haven't done this, you haven't done that, to have all of that in place. The last thing we need to do in June is have a report on our progress, which of course we can't do yet, but we're looking forward to showing that. And you will be receiving soon another one of my reports, and it'll probably be in the board brief, on our actual English learners' progress again toward the critical standards in reading comprehension. I gave that to you, I believe, in December probably, or maybe it was in January, taken from the November report cards. We're right in the middle of parent conferences again and our next trimester of report cards. And so I will give you that again, and if you like, I'll attach the former one so you can see the progress, or maybe I'll figure it out in a chart so that you can see it actually in one way. But we're anticipating, our English learners to really be moving ahead, and it'll be slow. You're not going to see a huge bump, but it's definitely something that teachers recognize as a real need, and they're seeing lots of great progress. Questions?
Well, first of all, thank you for pulling it all together. I think that the need was recognized, and then the difficult question is, where do we go from here? How do we pull it all together? So thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
And thank you also for making the progress report. I think it was something that we needed, particularly as schools have reached that very critical crossroad in January of providing time at every single site. Quickly, board questions. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say thank you for getting us those schedules, because one of the things that has come up, of course, is that while our schools have many English learners, they have many fluent native speakers of English. I'm very curious to see how the schools are handling that differently. I know that certainly at Adams, of course, it's a grade level thing where you need to know also what the native speakers of English are doing during that ELD time. So I'll be curious to see that. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We really appreciated that. Now we are returning to our consent agenda items. It was D7, D10, D13. Who calls D7? Who pulled it? Ask the question, sir.
There were 3 items here I was curious about. An NCLB program grant writer being paid for by EIA funds. A trainer for the GATE certificate program. I wanted to learn more about that. $52.38 for that, and a group meeting facilitator for Title I students and staff, $6,000 of Title I funds. On the 2 categoricals, I just have a little trouble seeing those being closely enough related to providing direct services to students.
Well, let's see who knows about those.
I didn't even know about the grant. I do know about the GATE. Are you interested in that
GATE
one?
trainer?
The GATE trainer.
Yeah.
That is a continuation. In fact, I'll do a report on our GATE program at some point. But we started the certification for, through UCSB Extension. This happens, Linda Calvin happens to be through the Tri-County GATE program. She's very well known. She is working with a large group of our teachers in the elementary and secondary district. Their meetings are on Saturdays, and she's training them toward getting their official certificate, GATE certificate.
Okay, I didn't know what that meant.
And it's paid for out of the GATE.
That's
It's
all.
split.
I just wanted to get an explanation
Sure.
of that.
I am not I unfortunately, I'm embarrassed. I don't know what the NCLB program grant writer from Cleveland, I don't know what that is.
Well, it's
I
something.
can find out.
It's a game that a lot of people in academia have played. You get your grant, and one of the first things you do is take a chunk of it to write the renewal and to go out and get more money. And I don't know whether that's really going on here or not, but that's what this evokes to me. And I just question whether that's an appropriate use of economic impact aid funds, which I believe should really be spent as maximally on the student directly, rather than trying to round up more money.
Yeah, I don't know from that description.
I don't either, and I may be making an unjust.
Well, they certainly wouldn't be applying for NCLB program.
I know.
I mean,
what it is.
we sent that in the CONAP.
Yeah.
So the board approved that, and I don't know what this grant writer is for as a result.
Yeah. And then the group meeting facilitator for Title I students and staff, that, I just don't know quite what that is. It's $6,000, Title I, but could we get an explanation of what that is?
May I make this, I don't think anybody can explain right now. May I make the suggestion that we approve it, that we get the explanation, and then revisit it if we don't like the explanation? Well, I mean, we've done that before with categorical funding, where we discovered it was not an approved use, and then the funding was shifted to replenish that particular
if you don't mind, I'd
categorical
just soon
fund.
vote no on it until I hear the explanation.
Well, does Dr. Robertson have anything to say?
No, I'm seeing no's all the way around.
Yeah. Can we not just postpone that item?
I suspect it's a bill that's already been paid, would be my guess.
Well, that's almost always the case on these
Yeah.
things. We get it all after the
Which
fact
is why
anyway,
I personally don't have any qualms in approving it and then backtracking to the source of the funds.
And what about the grant writer thing? Are we going to do that the same way, or what?
I'll find out about that. I don't know. With categorical funding, of course, we can look to see what it is, and if you need to transfer funds and change the expense, we'll have to do that if it's not appropriate.
Well, I just feel that we should jealously guard those categorical funds and make sure that, to the maximum extent possible, they get to the kids.
I don't think anybody disagrees, Dr. Noel.
I know, I know.
Yeah, yeah.
When I put it that philosophic
No,
level. Okay, I accept your proposal.
Does somebody want to make a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
That was Ms. Malakoff. Is there a second?
A second, subject to that understanding.
Thank you, Dr. Noel. We move to approve with the proviso that we may have to make some fund shifts. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any noes? So it passes 5-0, and those items will, at least an explanation will come back to us. Item D10, approval of transportation agreement with Goleta Union School District.
I asked to have that pulled as well. $34,522, secondary home-to-school transportation. I mean, this has been around for a long time. I've, of late, given our budgetary crisis, I have started wondering more about our transportation expenses and would like, in general, to look at them very, very carefully and see what we can do to reduce them. And that raises the question here whether or not parents participate in this in some way. And I believe I read somewhere that we do collect some money for transportation for parents. I saw it in one account. I've never seen them lined up parallel. But
I only remember
And this is,
seeing,
this is for the current year. I want to point that out. This is, I mean, I agree with you. I'm perfectly open to looking at transportation expense for the upcoming year.
Well,
I'm not,
do we know, I mean, is this the whole thing, or is there a parent component that we don't see here matched?
This is an ongoing contract that we have with Goleta to provide, because they send buses for the because the elementary kids are in these areas, and what happens is the children that are secondary children get on the Goleta bus, ride it into the Goleta Union area, and then they pick up transportation, either city buses to come to us. We have a program where we purchase metropolitan transport passes that we send out to the school sites, and some of the kids pay for them either at a reduced rate or they pay the full rate, and we provide them through the school.
So what I'm hearing is that there's no money in, that this bill that goes to Goleta is not in part paid for by parents.
That would be correct.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to know.
Is there a motion to approve it?
Move to approve.
Second.
That was Cordero Malakoff. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 It passes 5-0. And then item D13, approval of proposal from Dudek and Associates for environmental review services for the potential consolidation and relocation of Santa Barbara Community Academy to La Cumbre Junior High School campus. I think there were a couple people who were interested in this item.
Yeah, I pulled that one because I'm concerned about the funding source. Measure V bond funds are appropriate for these services?
I had another question from another board member along the same lines. I asked for legal advice on this. Based on court precedent, yes, it is certainly permissible to use bond money to pay for incidental costs, and now this is right out of the court case, incidental costs including environmental impact assessments.
Well,
Now-
I don't dispute that it's
Yes.
appropriate to use bond money for environmental assessments, but it just seems to me that it's appropriate to use it for environmental assessments for secondary district property that's going to benefit secondary students.
We're right. Let me continue. That's also based on the statutes, reading of the statutes, the resolutions for the bonds from the school board and the ballot language. Now, there is another possibility, and that is the use of developer fees. And developer fees are for the construction and reconstruction of school facilities. However, there are incidental costs to developer fees, including environmental impact. Now, whether I-98, whether Measure V, whether elementary developer fees, or whether secondary developer fees are used, is really a question of what we finally decide to do. And given that we have not made that decision, I would defer to Ms. Harder for a solution, which I thought was a good one.
Actually, what I suggested to Dr. Sarvis and to Mr. Price in a telephone conversation that we had was to proceed with the study, to pay for it out of Measure V funds. When we made a decision about what the use was for the surplus property at La Cumbre, when we determined what that was, whether it was to continue to move a community academy in that direction, it could be to, rent the space, that at that point in time, when that decision is made, a facilities master plan decision is made for the property, that then if it is a decision that involves elementary, that be paid on a pro rata share by the I-98 fund.
What does the Measure V Oversight Committee think about that?
Hasn't even come to Measure V.
Is that normal, that if you're going to spend Measure V money, that it doesn't go to the Oversight Committee first?
The Oversight Committee doesn't approve or disapprove of expenditures. They examine expenditures, and we've made many expenditures like this. Thousands of dollars have been spent at DP, for instance, on, DP is probably the only campus on CEQA, both for the creek bed and for the addition of the facilities there, the pool, the auditorium, the stadium. There have been light studies, sound studies that all played into an overall environmental study, and then from that, mitigated negative declaration was created. So these kinds of soft costs are fairly typical for
And I really don't
bond
question
expense.
the soft costs for bond expense.
It's the
really this
allocation of
issue.
funds,
It's
right.
the allocation of funds because there is no Citizens Oversight Committee, obviously, for this bond, but I think that we, as board members, just have to be very careful
Well.
about voter intent
We are-
when
we
these
are
bonds
that
were,
committee, yes.
well, we are, but because of Proposition 39 now, the Citizens Oversight Committee is very specifically spelled out for what must go in place. And you kind of need to think along the lines of what would a Citizens Oversight Committee do? They would probably have a very different perspective than this board does. But it's
But
hard
these, both
to-
of these bonds were passed pre.
Well before that, and I'm aware
39,
of that.
right.
But anything in the future, future bond measures, as they come up, they'll look at how this board spent its previous bond money. So I personally would prefer the money to come out of developer fees for this than out of either Measure V or I-98, so.
I think that it was questionable whether it could come out of developer fees. I think that there's you know, an indication legally that it's
Yes.
probably not an appropriate use of developer fees. You can use developer fees for the actual construction based on growth at a school campus. But for
a
soft costs like
conundrum.
these,
Maybe another bond measure then for this specific thing. But I just don't feel that this is appropriate, so.
I'd like to echo Mrs. Parker's comments, look at it a little bit differently. If we were sitting as a board of the Santa Barbara High School District, which is the district that borrowed the money that have got to put through the Measure V, I mean, the Measure V is about a high school district, that I would not find any reason whatsoever to fund a traffic study that is 100% designed to answer questions related to an elementary district issue and use. And I just can't get beyond that. I also would question, just in general, the use of funds that were raised, and I remember the language of Measure V very clearly, funds that were raised for the purposes that are stated in the Measure V language being used for this particular purpose doesn't seem to fit to me. And finally, I would simply say, yes, take it out of some other fund, but don't take it out of Measure V.
Go ahead, Ms. Malko.
Is the only other fund the general fund?
Yes. That is where it stands, yes, the general fund.
Well, yeah.
No, I'm not.
Somebody said, I thought Dr. Sarvis said developers fees, but.
No, we cannot
We
use
cannot
developer
use
fees. When it comes to the actual construction or changes
I mean, it's
to accommodate growth, it can be used.
I'd be happy to say it more specifically. It should be paid for by the elementary district out of whatever fund it can pay for it out of.
Well, that's presuming that we know what the decision is for the facility. So
No, it's a function of intent. It's a function of where you start, not with where you end up. This is being done for the
and that
elementary
case can be
district.
made.
It says so in the literature, in all the documents. It's being done for the Santa Barbara Community Academy.
Well, we could start with I-98 funds, and if we decide that we're simply going to rent the facility, say, to a private university, then it would probably revert to Measure V funds. I mean, you wouldn't
Well, I
want
don't
to
see why we
use.
would need a traffic study. I mean, I guess that's the question is.
Actually, when we get back to the question of intent, and pardon me for interrupting you, that is really the question that keeps rolling over in my mind. If we weren't talking about moving the community academy to La Cumbre, if we were talking about increasing the enrollment to La Cumbre by redrawing boundary lines, for instance, around the other junior highs, so as to increase the La Cumbre population, would neighbors be asking for a traffic study? If we were talking about many other possible permutations, moving La Cuesta, for instance, all of La Cuesta to La Cumbre, would we be talking about doing a traffic study? Was the traffic study a barrier to moving Community Academy to La Cumbre? And I'm not saying that the neighbors' concerns are disingenuous, but I see it as having been put up as a roadblock to
Well, what I
Community
see is
Academy
that
being moved there.
if you move anything else there, you might need to do a different traffic study because the parameters will be different. And so I'm just a little concerned. I
Well,
mean, this is an elementary issue.
Since this was initiated by the conceptual move to transfer the rest of Community Academy to La Cumbre, then let me put I-98 funds on the table then.
Okay, well, but that raises another question.
Yes?
And I guess we've heard this one before. How appropriate is it to use elementary district funds for things that are in effect related to physical improvements of a high school district property? And I'm not sure whether this fits directly in that, but I know that question has been raised before. And I think maybe we even have legal counsel on that one too, way back, going back many years, but.
Well, it seems to me if we're going to argue intent,
Yes.
that we need to be consistent. If we're saying the argument is that the purpose of this is really to accommodate an elementary campus, then it seems perfectly reasonable to start out funding it with I-98 funds. If in the course of doing the review, we discovered that in fact that is not going to be the use. It is going to be focused more on accommodating some other kind of configuration. Then we could, at that point, reimburse I-98 with funds from another source that would be more appropriate, which would seem to be Measure V.
You know, it might be helpful to, I don't recall
Well, that's why.
anything in the I-98 language that would. Okay, well, but that raises another question.
Yes?
And I guess we've heard this one before. How appropriate is it to use elementary district funds for things that are in effect related to physical improvements of a high school district property? And I'm not sure whether this fits directly in that, but I know
some other kind of configuration, then we could, at that point, reimburse I-98 with funds from another source that would be more appropriate, which would seem to be Measure V.
you know, it might be helpful to go back and read I-98, and see what its purpose was. I don't recall
Well, that's why.
anything in the I-98 language that would bring this under its wing, but I haven't read it in many years.
Well, that's why I asked legal counsel to go back and read it, and was told today that it is permissible to use I-98 funds.
Can we hear what I-98 says?
Well, I have reread it pretty recently, and it tries to be as broad as it possibly can. It does say that it is for the elementary district, and
There's for
there's
refurbishment and building facilities?
renovation and construction. But then
Site
there's
development?
also, bond language is broad, but the ballot language was not so broad. And so what you can do legally and what voters intended when they voted for it, in this case, they're kind of different things because the I-98 has morphed so much over the years. But again, it does raise the same issue. When you're combining this situation where you have elementary on secondary and secondary on elementary, it's not that that's necessarily a bad idea. It's just that maybe the way these bonds are paid for by taxpayers from two separate districts, it may just not be the best revenue source for it.
There are a number of incidental costs associated with any sort of construction, and no language would say that, and we're going to pay for inspection costs, we're going to pay for testing of the materials, and that's why Mr. Price felt that the court precedent was particularly applicable here, because it dealt specifically with the use of bond money and said that, yes.
Money to pay those incidental costs?
Well, let me ask this.
That sounds
If
dicey
we
to me.
decided to go ahead with an option that said we were going to move K-3 to La Cumbre School. We have a number of costs associated with that. One of the costs is to lower the plumbing fixtures in the restrooms. Would we use Measure V money, or since we're accommodating elementary students, would we use I-98 money? To my mind, I think we'd use I-98 money for that. If it was to create a faculty lounge or convert a room so that it could be used as a faculty lounge for La Cumbre, would we use Measure V or I-98? I think we would use Measure V funds. If it was to create additional parking and an additional drop-off loop to accommodate the elementary school, then I think we would probably use I-98 money. I mean, I think we would cut each one of those by its function, and to my mind, this is most closely associated with that parking and drop-off, which I think is an elementary expense.
Well, I think that for me anyway, I have so many issues with using these funds in general for this purpose. I mean, I have Dr. Flores's response to the grand jury in 2002 when she talks about why it is, because the grand jury came forward at that point and said, why aren't you building the Hidden Valley School? And her response is, well, if you look at the bond language, the ballot language, it said another possibility was to use it for a downtown school instead. And so the focus was not on spending money on the academy with this, it was on creating a downtown school. And as I said, I mean, things have changed over the years, but I think it's really important for us not to lose sight of what the voters originally intended, because otherwise there can be no trust that the district will use the money the way it says it's going to use the money when it passes a facilities bond. Measure V has a priorities list. I-98 has a priorities list. I think that it just all needs to be addressed.
So are you suggesting this cost should come out of the general fund?
Well, I mean, obviously, that's the only place that I can see it at this point, apparently. That's not what I was, when I saw this, and I could see that I was going to have a problem with it, I didn't think that general fund was going to be the only possible other source.
Well, as the chair, I have the ability to throw a motion out there, and I will, and let's see if anything sticks. I move to approve the proposal from DUDEC for environmental review for the potential consolidation relocation of Santa Barbara Community Academy to La Cumbre Junior High School campus, and would designate that it come from I-98 funds and be readjusted as appropriate depending on the future use of La Cumbre Junior High School.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, if there's any is there any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
No.
No.
Okay, so it passes 3-2.
Who seconded that?
Mrs. Cordero. Okay, we are on to coming events. Actually, I think Dr. Sarvis covered that pretty thoroughly, except for meetings.
Except for meetings. There is no board meeting next Tuesday. This may come as a shock to you.
I'll tell you, it'll come as a shock to my husband.
The question was, we have a regular meeting on March 13th. The regular meeting on March 27th is canceled because of spring break.
Yes.
Are we going to schedule a meeting for March 20th?
I believe we should, yes. We have, in fact, we have lined up the program improvement schools to do their program improvement presentations for the year 3 and year 4 schools tentatively for March 20.
March 20?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
13 is a regular meeting and 20 is a special meeting.
Is that the meeting? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch what Dr. Sarvis was saying. Is that when the special reports are going to be?
Yes, from
So that would be at
program
5
improvement
o'clock on
schools.
March 20.
Okay.
There, that's what you were looking for, right?
Yes.
And the 27th is canceled?
The 27th is canceled, right, because it's the first week of spring break. Okay. Any board correspondence? Board comments? Future agenda items? Then this meeting is adjourned.